One day, shrouded in a heavy veil of anxiety and uncertainty, the Marquis of Renati's estate stretched out, illuminated by the faint light of hope for the return of his missing daughter. The story of the disappearance of Arabella, the Marquise's daughter, spread around the neighborhood like a sad messenger, bringing sorrow and despair to the hearts of her family. Long days and nights filled with restless searches and prayers did not bring the desired result, and Arabella remained undiscovered, as if vanished into thin air, leaving only unanswered questions. The situation became more complicated every day, because the news of the missing daughter of the Marquis attracted the attention of many impostors who sought to take advantage of the desperation of parents. With each appearance of Arabella, who turned out to be another fraud, the hearts of the parents were filled with more and more despair and pain, exacerbating the already difficult atmosphere in the house. At such times, when the Renati home was enveloped in silent grief, the youngest daughter, Anita, endowed with childlike spontaneity and a desire to help, decided to invite her mother to dinner, trying to dispel the heavy atmosphere in some way. As she approached her mother, however, Anita found that her entire attention was consumed with thoughts of the missing Arabella. The mother, burdened with fear and anxiety about the fate of her eldest daughter, was unable to pay proper attention to her youngest, whose heart was full of desire to support and comfort. Thus, the story of the disappearance of the daughter of the Marquis of Renoti became not only a search for a missing soul, but also a test for all members of the family, torn by fear, despair, and, at the same time, the thirst to find any trace that could return the lost hope. At the moment when the tension in the air reached its climax, the Marquis of Renoti, whose emotions were on the brink, could not find it in herself to bear the sight of her daughter Anita, and with bitterness in her heart sent her to her room, seeking refuge from the pain which the sight of the girl was causing her. Anita, stunned and full of a desire to comfort and be by her mother's side in this difficult hour, extended her hand to her in a gesture of peace and support. But the Marquise, caught up in the whirlwind of her feelings, could not accept the gesture. Instead of accepting her daughter's hand, she screamed and pushed her hand away as if the touch itself were unbearable. Anita, sensing the rejection, immediately turned around, leaving the Marquise alone with her grief. The Marquise, meanwhile, exhausted and broken, sat down by the crib where her other daughter, Arabella, whose disappearance had been an unspeakable blow to her. There, in the privacy of her grief, she allowed herself to sob, immersed in the memories of her lost daughter. This moment left a deep mark on the Marquise's heart, reminding her that the wounds left by loss don't heal for long and sometimes remain open, a reminder of the pain that time cannot heal. The fate of the Renati family was inextricably linked to the continuation of their ancient lineage, and so when Arabella, the firstborn of the family, disappeared without a trace, the parents faced the question of the need for an heir. In this world where a family's every move was determined by tradition and obligations to ancestors, Anita's birth was an answer to prayers for the continuation of the lineage. However, the inner turmoil of her parents shrouded the girl's birth in a shadow of grief and despair. They were convinced that loving a child conceived in an attempt to heal the open wounds of loss would be tantamount to betraying the memory of Arabella. This belief laid the foundation of isolation and loneliness for Anita, who grew up in the shadow of her missing sister, never fully feeling the warmth of parental love and acceptance. This story tells of the tragic paradox when attempts to preserve the memory of the lost leave a new life in exile from the hearts of loved ones. Anita, born in a moment of her parents' deepest despair, grew up in a world where her existence was filled with the tacit acknowledgement that she was nothing more than a substitute for the lost. In this silence, saturated with unspoken words and love not given, Anita searched for her place, trying to understand and accept the role fate had assigned her in the history of her family. In this world where Anita felt like a lonely island amidst a stormy sea of family dramas and incurable wounds, there was a beacon of hope and genuine concern. That beacon was Axion Rakide, her fiancé and heir to the Archduke, who had been not only her faithful companion but her only friend since childhood. Contrary to conventional norms and traditions that often dictated cold calculation in choosing a life partner, their relationship was built on a deep mutual understanding and sincere affection that grew out of years of friendship and shared memories. While Anita's parents were consumed with memories and the search for the missing Arabella, Axion became Anita's support and refuge from the storms that never subsided in her home. He, realizing the depth of her loneliness and alienation, took a step so rare for a man of his position. He invited Anita to become part of his family. This invitation was not a mere formality due to their betrothal, but a sincere desire to share with her the warmth and acceptance that was so lacking in her life. Axion, unlike many others, saw Anita not as a shadow of her missing sister, but as a distinctive person, deserving of love and happiness. His actions broke stereotypes and prejudices, demonstrating that true care and affection can cross any boundaries imposed by society or family obligations. Being invited into the Axion family was an important turning point for Anita, giving her a new perspective on a world where she is valued and loved not for her title or background, but for the unique person she is. Suddenly, fate decided to make adjustments in the life of the Renati family, presenting an event that was a real shock to all members of the family. The Renati house, which for years had been shrouded in a shroud of loneliness and longing for the missing Arabella, suddenly came alive with news that was like a miracle. Arabella, the daughter, the sister, the dream they had never stopped thinking about even for a moment, was coming home. A whole 19 years had passed, full of prayers and forlorn hopes, and here she was, Arabella, back among her own, returning from the abyss of time like a heroine of ancient legends. The confirmation of her identity was nothing less than an imperial gift she received as a child. This object, endowed not only with material but also symbolic value, was the key to her identity, unmistakably indicating that the girl before them was none other than the long-awaited Arabella Renati. The return, shrouded in an aura of mysticism and predestination, could not leave the family members and the world around them indifferent. It was not just a homecoming, it was a moment when broken hearts found solace and years of waiting and despair found meaning. For Anita, who had spent her whole life feeling like a shadow of her missing sister, the news of Arabella's return was a test of unprecedented power. Her heart was filled with a whirlwind of conflicting feelings, from joy for her family to the inevitable fear of being forgotten and invisible again. Arabella's return carried both the promise of healing the long-standing wounds of the Renati family and the foreshadowing of new challenges for Anita, who, against all odds, had to find the strength to accept a new chapter in the book of her life. Since Arabella's triumphant return to the Renati family, Anita's life has become a series of ongoing trials and hardships. Her parents, trying to make up for the lost years and provide Arabella with a life abundant in love and attention, have crossed the line of reasonableness. Their concern turned into an obsessive desire to do everything for one daughter, while summarily ignoring the feelings and needs of the other. They wanted Arabella to have the best of everything possible, not only what Anita had, but what she couldn't even dream of. This quest for justice in their eyes took the form of an unprecedented injustice. They began to take away Anita's belongings, each of which was part of her life and history, depriving her of her personal space and memories. But the cruelest test for Anita was her parents' decision to break her engagement to Axion Rakiti, the only man who had been by her side all her life, supporting and understanding her like no one else. The decision to break off the engagement was not a mere whim or a desire to right the wrongs of the past. It was a cold calculation. Arabella was to marry Axion to strengthen the already powerful Renati family, bringing it even more glory and influence. In the eyes of their parents, the union of Arabella and Axion was seen as the perfect union that would be the crowning achievement of their aspirations and efforts to revive the family's greatness. Anita finds herself pushed into a corner of her own destiny, facing the betrayal of those she thought closest to her. Her love and devotion, which she had given unconditionally to her family, was met with cold calculation and indifference. This turn of events not only tested her inner strength and determination, but also forced her to rethink her place in a world where the rules of the game are determined not by feelings, but by cold profit. The situation in the Rennetti household grew more complicated by the day, reaching a boiling point when the Marquis of Rennetti, without restraint of emotion, expressed her indignation at Arabella's inability to marry Axion. Her words, full of despair and frustration, found an echo in the heart of her husband, the Marquis of Rennetti, who promised to make every effort to remedy the situation. This storm of feeling was not only to restore justice in their eyes, but also to secure the future they thought Arabella deserved. Marquis, while expressing his support and understanding to his wife, simultaneously found a role for Anita in his plans, stating that he needed her help around the house and in running things. This decision, which appeared at first glance as a recognition of Anita's importance, in fact only emphasized her secondary position in the family. The Marquis argued that Arabella deserved to be happy, thus implying that one daughter's happiness was above the well-being of the other. Anita, overhearing this conversation, found herself at a loss and confused. On the one hand, she saw that her parents were willing to do anything for Arabella's happiness, even if it meant sacrificing Anita's interests. On the other hand, her own future and happiness didn't seem to matter in the eyes of her family. These thoughts and feelings created a whirlwind in Anita's soul, leaving her lonely and misunderstood even by those closest to her. The dilemma Anita faced was not only how to tell Axion what she had heard, but how to find her place in a world where her own wants and needs seemed invisible to those she loved. This moment becomes a turning point in her life, forcing her to rethink her relationship with her family and determine what is truly important to her. Just as the silence enveloped the room, echoing in the corners of Anita's heart, there was a sudden knock on the door. That sound cut through the air, upsetting the delicate balance of emotion that reigned between Anita and Axion. Not a soul in the room could even guess who might be behind the door, thus adding another mystery to the already confusing story of their lives. Anita turned toward the door and assumed the role of mistress of the moment. With every step she took toward the door, the tension rose, as if it were a harbinger of change to come. And when she finally opened the door, behind her was the Marquis Renetti, whose presence at this moment seemed as unexpected as it was exciting. The Marquise herself, the owner of power and respect, stood before the threshold, but her eyes read an unusual request. She was making a request that could change the course of their destinies. The Marquise asked Anita to organize a meeting between Arabella and Axion. It was more than a simple request. It was a test for everyone involved in the story. Anita was thus faced with a choice that could not only determine her own future, but also the future of the relationship between the two families. At this moment in time, she became the primary link connecting the past to a possible future where every decision and action she made carried weight. Anita could accept that Arabella was getting everything that Anita couldn't afford, but Anita couldn't give Arabella Axion as well. Anita closed the door behind her and declared that she would not introduce Arabella to Axion. In response, the Marquise Renati accused Anita of cruelty. Anita, standing in front of the closed door, felt the weight of her decision. Her heart was filled with a mixture of feelings, where the bitterness of betrayal and the struggle for her own happiness merged into one. She realized that the world she had grown up in, where every step and every word was weighed with care, now required her to make a decision that could change her life forever. Marquise Renati, stunned by Anita's refusal, could not contain her indignation. Her words, full of accusations against Anita, cut through the air like a blade. The Marquise argued that Anita's refusal to introduce Arabella to Axion was an act of pure cruelty and selfishness, while ignoring the depth of feeling and the complexity of her daughter's situation. But to Anita, standing behind the closed door, the Marquise's words were only an echo of long-accumulated pain and loneliness. She had already compromised for too long, trying to please her parents, sacrificing her own desires and dreams. But the question of Axion was not only about her personal happiness, but also about her personal pride and dignity. Anita knew that her decision would cause a flurry of resentment and perhaps even alienation from her family, but she also realized that some things in life were worth fighting for. Axion wasn't just a fiancé, he was her support, the only man who saw her true essence and loved her for it. In that moment, Anita made the decision to not only protect her love for Axion, but to start fighting for her own place in a world where her wants and needs had been ignored until now. The situation in the Renati house had escalated to the extreme. The Marquise Renati, in her anger and frustration, hurls a wave of accusations at Anita, not noticing how her words hurt not only Anita but also Arabella. Arabella, an unexpected witness to this conflict, tried to intervene, but her efforts only resulted in her becoming a victim of the situation herself. The fright and stress of the Marquise's sudden screaming and her attempts to persuade her to stop caused Arabella to pass out, causing her mother to panic. At this point, Anita, despite her previous quarrel and tension with the Marquise, showed herself to be a responsible and caring sister. She instantly realized the seriousness of the situation and went to fetch a doctor, putting aside all grudges and disagreements for the sake of Arabella's health. The Marchesa, left alone with her unconscious daughter, may have faced the consequences of her actions and words for the first time. Her concern for Arabella forced her to rethink her behavior and perhaps even understand how her actions might have affected both daughters. This incident was a turning point in the history of the Renati family, forcing everyone to reflect on the value of family ties and the importance of support and understanding between family members. For Anita, however, it was another step toward realizing her role not only as a daughter, but also as an independent person, ready to act for the good of her loved ones, even if it requires her to temporarily put aside personal grudges and disagreements. Walking down the narrow corridor of the ancient mansion, Anita suddenly bumped into a maid who was hurrying about her business. At that moment, without wasting a second, she quickly gave her orders to immediately find a doctor for Arabella, who had suddenly lost consciousness and fainted. Like a frightened bird, the maid turned and ran for help, and the pot slipped out of her hands with a clatter and shattered on the floor. Left alone in the corridor, Anita thought for a moment. Her thoughts were full of doubts that Arabella might really have some health problems. Suddenly a smile appeared on her face. She realized that Arabella was probably faking fainting to outsmart her. Anita realized that it was all just a cunning plan to evade her and meet Axion. This moment of revelation made Anita marvel at Arabella's resourcefulness and ingenuity, even though she had been deceived. In a secluded room of the mansion where time seemed to stop, a very tense meeting was taking place. Arabella, taking a seat across from Axion, began to apologize for her sudden appearance, unprepared by any warning. Her voice trembled, and there was not only guilt but also a certain uneasiness in its wavering. Arabella felt a wave of coldness envelop her as she thought about the fact that, for all Axion's outward courtesy and nobility, he instilled fear in her. In his presence, she felt like she was on the edge of a precipice, desperately trying to keep her balance. Never before had Arabella allowed the thought that her plan could have failed, much less that she would faint at the most crucial moment. Nevertheless, the sudden fainting was a surprise to her, but the joy of a quick return to reality was overshadowed by fear. She was relieved that she had recovered quickly enough not to frighten her mother to the extreme. Arabella was aware of the complexity of the moment she found herself in, and her heart beat in unison with every second that passed in this intense dialogue with Axion. After Arabella came to her senses, it was her mother who, grasping a unique opportunity, offered her daughter an exceptional opportunity. She advised Arabella to meet with Axion despite the girl's mixed feelings, especially her concern for Anita. This proposal was a challenge for Arabella. On the one hand, she did not want to contradict her parents' wishes and tried to meet their expectations. On the other hand, she was overwhelmed by the thought that she was violating etiquette by coming to Axion's house without prior approval. The gravity of the breach of etiquette was so strong that Arabella could barely breathe. She felt the air grow heavy, and each breath was a reminder that she had stepped onto a path she herself thought was wrong. In the back of her mind, Arabella knew that she was putting herself in a vulnerable position by breaking established rules and traditions, which made her even more susceptible to any criticism or disapproval from Axion. Despite the internal struggle and mental torment, the desire not to disappoint my parents took over. Arabella, feeling obliged to apologize for her unexpected appearance, turned to Axion again to ask for forgiveness. Axion didn't seem to give it much thought, however, waving his hand and emphasizing that Arabella was in his house by no choice of her own. Those words made Arabella wonder how much Axion could have learned from listening to her earlier conversation with her mother. At this point, a smile appeared on Axion's face when he mentioned Anita's imminent return, which surprised Arabella even more. The way he said Anita's name was so gentle and warm that Arabella couldn't help but notice this peculiarity in his voice, reflecting his deep feelings for Anita. Meanwhile, Anita, standing outside the door, was trapped in her own emotions. She struggled with the waves of anger that were rising in her toward both her mother and Arabella. This storm of feelings was caused not only by Arabella's unexpected appearance in the house, but also by the general situation in which she was involved without her knowledge. The complexity of Anita's emotional state was that she was forced to confront not only the external circumstances associated with the unexpected visit, but also the internal dilemma associated with her feelings and relationships with others. At Renati Manor, where every corner breathed history and secrets, the mood was tense, especially with regard to Anita. She felt the hard stares of the people of the manor who seemed to accuse her of all mortal sins, just as if she had taken away everything that was dear to Arabella. This atmosphere of unspoken accusations and innuendo made Anita think seriously about her position in this house and the future that awaited her. With these heavy thoughts about the future and how she could mend her relationship with the people of the manor, Anita knocked on the door of Axion's room. The thought entered her heart that perhaps, for the sake of the peace of the manor and her own peace of mind, she would have to give way to Arabella if she wanted to find acceptance here. Axion was the only person in the entire estate who seemed to be the light at the end of the tunnel for her, the only support in this whirlwind of events and emotions. When the door opened and she entered, a strange and incomprehensible feeling swept over her as she glanced at Arabella. At that moment, Arabella, with a smile radiating sincerity and lightness, jumped up to Anita, apologizing for her sudden fainting. This gesture of Arabella's, full of attention and apology, made Anita feel even more embarrassed and affected. Anita pondered the events that had brought her sister Arabella back to the family domain, fearing that Arabella had come to take everything that belonged to Anita. After years of absence, when everyone had come to terms with the idea that Arabella was lost forever, her sudden appearance raised many questions. Where had Arabella been wandering all these years? What made her come back now? In this atmosphere of misunderstanding and doubt, Arabella exchanged glances with Axion, which only added to the murkiness of an already confusing story. Anita, unwilling to tolerate this tension, strongly suggested that her sister leave, not even hoping Arabella would agree. Arabella, embarrassed but not without dignity, accepted the decision with enthusiasm and gratitude. Her bow of appreciation to Anita and her joyful smile at parting were complete contrast to her mystery story. She wished Anita a good day and, inspired, left the room, leaving behind questions and reticence. Standing alone, Anita felt the weight of thoughts of sisterly rivalry and the differences in their fates. Her sister Arabella, despite all the years spent in obscurity, perhaps in hardship and struggle, returned home with a cheerfulness and ease that seemed impossible for one who had endured such trials. While Anita, who grew up within the safe and comfortable walls of the estate, felt deprived of the same carefree and joyfulness from an early age. The next moment, when the silence between the walls of Renati Manor seemed to breathe past and present, Anita, with a note of embarrassment in her voice, turned to Axion. She apologized for the fact that her parents might have seemed rude in their communication or actions. Axion, a man of peace and understanding, brushed it off easily, claiming that the whole thing was not worth the attention. However, despite his levity and willingness to forgive misunderstandings, Anita felt that the atmosphere of the tea party had been somewhat spoiled and suggested that their meeting be concluded. Axion, always a gentleman and a friend of the family, stood up, agreeing to her suggestion. But before he left, he suggested a splendid idea. The next tea party should be held on his own estate. The gesture was filled not only with an offer of hospitality, but also with support, a sign that the friendship and respect between them had not been tarnished by the failed tea party. Anita, smiling back, accepted his offer gladly. This exchange of smiles and good intentions was like a ray of light in the fog of misunderstandings, a reminder that true friendship and family ties can withstand even the most awkward situations. Anita felt comforted in the fact that despite all the difficulties in relationships within her own family, she could still find shelter and understanding in Axion's home, where she was always welcome. It was a reminder that friendships and alliances built on respect and caring can be the foundation upon which support can be found in life's most unexpected moments. At the dawn of a new day, when the sun's rays had barely begun to break through the lush curtains of the Renati estate, it was time for breakfast, during which the family gathered together. In this morning's meeting, Anita's parents showed concern for Arabella, wondering if she was satisfied with the food offered and pressing her to add another portion, emphasizing the importance of good nutrition after so many years of separation. The atmosphere was filled with warmth and caring, albeit with a touch of awkwardness inherent in meeting after a long absence. Arabella's attention suddenly turned to Anita when she noticed that she was limiting herself to just salad, despite the variety of dishes on the table. This moment seemed ready to open the door to a new conversation, perhaps even a personal confession or discussion. But before Anita could react or explain her choice in any way, Marquise Renati, the matriarch of the family, beat her to it. With confidence and some determination in her voice, she said that Anita had always been frugal with her food, and that Arabella need not worry about that. The Marquise repeated her request for Arabella to focus on her diet, emphasizing that the girl seemed too frail after so many years of absence. Arabella's apology for her appearance and weight not meeting her parents' expectations opened the way for a deeper and perhaps more painful discussion. The Marchesa said it was their fault that while Arabella was starving, they had lived without denying themselves anything and asked Anita if she agreed with them. Suddenly, Marquise, taking responsibility for the situation, suddenly shifted her focus to Anita, bringing up her relationship with her sister and their different life paths. Noting that they felt Anita had behaved rudely by not wanting to introduce Arabella to Axion, the parents not only expressed disappointment in Anita's behavior, but also raised the topic of injustice and guilt. They began to blame Anita for the fact that she should be ashamed that Anita was living a good life while Arabella was starving, living on the streets, trying to cause her deep feelings of guilt and misunderstanding. Anita boldly voiced her opinion about the heavy burden of guilt her parents carried on their shoulders over the disappearance of Arabella, who vanished without a trace for a long 19 years. Anita, who had not experienced the joy of getting to know her sister, nevertheless felt the weight of guilt that her parents sought to shift onto her shoulders as well, and declared that they should stop. Her father's reaction to Anita's words was immediate and explosive, like thunder. He took her words as a challenge, as a disrespect to the elders, and shouted that she should not treat her parents like that. This moment was a boiling point for Anita, who, boiling with resentment and misunderstanding, stood up to take the decisive and defiant step of standing up for herself. She stated that she did not want to be part of a family game in which her role seemed imposed and insincere, then headed for the sanctuary of her room, seeking refuge from the storm of emotion and conflict. Her parents, stunned and annoyed by the sudden outburst of defiance, tried to stop her by raising their voices and expressing their disapproval of her behavior. Their words, filled with reproaches for rudeness and inappropriate behavior, echoed in the walls, adding heaviness to the already heated atmosphere of the house. That day, the dining room became the stage for a family drama that reached its climax when the father, losing control of his emotions, erupted in rage. His abrupt gesture, hitting the dining table like a thunderclap, sent a wave of consternation through everyone present. Arabella, an unwilling participant in what was happening, could not hold her plate, and it, like a symbol of shattered family tranquility, shattered on the floor, scattering shards and food. The momentary fear in Arabella's eyes was the catalyst that made the parents realize the consequences of their explosion of emotions. They immediately stopped their shouting, trying to restore the fragile calm of the house so as not to add to their daughter's consternation. Arabella, whose heart was filled with apologies for the spilled food, met understanding in her parents' eyes. They hastened to assure her that there was no fault on her, and that her act was no cause for anger or annoyance. However, in this situation, the parents did not fail to use the occasion to once again turn the arrows of accusations towards Anita, thus trying to justify their behavior. They began to slander the younger daughter, claiming that her character had always been far from ideal, thus trying to undermine Arabella's trust in her sister. Anita, remaining calm and collected in this whirlwind of family passions, chose to leave the dining room, leaving behind a space filled with tension and resentment. The father, convinced that he was obliged to punish Anita, ordered the maid to bring Anita to his office within the hour. Her father's order to meet in his office was another test for Anita, but instead of immediately giving in to panic or fear of punishment, she decided to use this time for herself to delve into the stories that helped her maintain her inner balance and fortitude. Anita, immersed in reading a book about her country's past, sought solace and distraction from her family's difficult situation. Reading about her country's past, its heroes and myths allowed Anita to feel part of something bigger, reminding her that every person has a role to play in the big story of life, and that every obstacle is just a step towards new discoveries and victories. The story of the founder of the empire and the mystical beast associated with Lake Alcente became for her not just a tale of the distant past, but a personal symbol of hope and possibility for something magical and transformative in her own life. Lake Alcente, the place where legend has it that the first emperor found his purpose with the help of a mystical beast, took on a special meaning for Anita after meeting Axion. This man became for her not only a friend or fiancé, but also a symbol of her own journey of self-discovery and inner transformation. In moments of doubt and trial, it was the thought of this place and her meeting with Axion that filled her heart with peace and confidence, that life was full of surprises, and every difficulty could lead to something significant and bright. This encounter with Axion on Lake Alcente may have been a pivotal moment in her life that helped Anita look at her trials in a new way and learn to find comfort and strength in the stories of her people, in the legends of the past that inspire feats, and help her keep her faith in the best, even in the most difficult moments. One bright, warm-filled day, when the sun was shining brightly and the air was filled with the scents of summer, 10-year-old Anita came to her friend's tea party. Amidst the cozy conversations and laughter, all of a sudden, Rachel Sauvier, one of the friends, suddenly expressed her displeasure. She noticed that Anita was often distracted, looking away from the lake, as if the people she was talking to couldn't interest her enough. This made Rachel think that Anita might be bored in their company. Anita, caught off guard by this remark, hastened to assure her friend that this was not the case. She tried to convince Rachel that her attention was being drawn away not from boredom, but from something else, which did not detract from her interest in the current conversation. But Rachel, not inclined to back down so easily, asked a direct question about the substance of their dialogue, trying to draw Anita out. With a casual smile that only added to the charm of her appearance, Anita quickly found a way out of the situation, claiming that the conversation was about the love flower, an amazing creation of nature known for its beauty and wonderful fragrance. This moment not only eased the tension, but also redirected the conversation in a more pleasant direction, giving Anita a chance to reflect for a moment on how she would have liked this tea party day, filled with both cozy conversations and moments of awkwardness. In the shade of the cool day, as the soft rustling of leaves and a light breeze created an atmosphere of mystery around Lake Alcente, Anita became the center of attention not only to her friends, but also to a spirit invisible to the rest of those present that hovered unnoticed around her. This mysterious companion, whom only Anita could see and hear, shared his observations with her. Rachel was apparently following Anita relentlessly, as if eager to win her friendship. For her part, however, Anita responded to the spirit with mere thoughts, skeptically noting that Rachel's real interest was likely not in herself, but in her family. This invisible connection to the spirit held special meaning for Anita, for it was here, on the shores of Lake Alcente, that she had first encountered this mysterious being 2 years ago. From then on, every approach to the lake filled her with excitement and anticipation of a new encounter, once again giving her the opportunity to hear and commune with spirit. This place became something of a magical corner for Anita, where she could immerse herself in a world hidden from the eyes of others, a world where she could be herself and share secrets with an invisible friend. The spirit's sudden and disturbing voice that reported the accident at the lake made Anita instantly feel a sharp rush of adrenaline. The situation demanded immediate action, but when Anita looked around for adults to step in and help, she found they were alone. At that moment, time slowed its run. The girl's heart beat more frequently, and her breathing became sharp and intermittent. With full determination, she stood up, informing her friends of her intention to check out what was going on by the lake, and without wasting a second, she hurried to the water. Reaching the shore, Anita looked around the lake for someone in trouble, but the water was calm, and no one was in sight. The fear that the man might have already drowned overwhelmed her, making her act even faster. In desperation, realizing the lack of time and lack of help, she asked the spirit to bring her friends so they could help or at least know where she was. Without a moment's hesitation, Anita jumped into the cool embrace of the lake, cutting its surface in two, plunging into the depths. Underwater, in a world of silence and shadowed blue hues, where every sound became muffled and time seemed to slow down, Anita saw the girl slowly sinking to the bottom. She didn't waste a second, swimming sharply toward her, her every stroke full of determination and strength. At that moment, Anita became the only hope for the girl, slowly sliding into the embrace of the lake's abyss. Anita's heart was beating for two, for now she was not just a 10-year-old girl at a tea party. She had become a savior, willing to defy nature itself for the life of another human being. The moment Anita, desperately fighting for every breath underwater, realized the gravity of the situation, a scenario full of despair and hopelessness began to unfold before her eyes. For the first time in her short but colorful adventure, she felt the unbearable weight of reality weigh on her shoulders. She realized that despite her best efforts and desire to help, they could both end up at the bottom of the lake, swallowed up by its murky depths. But suddenly, as if by magic, a powerful water column rose from the depths of the lake which, like the hands of nature itself, gently but decisively pushed both girls to the surface and further, to the safety of the shore. This moment was so unexpected and magical that Anita could hardly believe what was happening. She realized that something beyond the ordinary had happened, something that had saved their lives. When she came to her senses on the shore, Anita saw a crowd of people gathered around to learn about the fate of the girls. Among them was Axion, a young man whose gratitude and relief for his mother's rescue was evident in his every movement and look. He approached Anita to express his gratitude for her heroism and determination. In that moment, Anita realized she was part of something much bigger than just a child's tea party by the lake. Her actions resulted in saving a life, and this was validated by a thank you from the very heart of a grateful son. Then Anita just looked into Axion's eyes and didn't even give her name, which after a while even amused her slightly. But what was more interesting was that even though Axion didn't know her name, he sent her a letter the next day, marking the beginning of their story. When Anita's hour of freedom came to an end, she found herself faced with the necessity of going to her father. With each step as she made her way across the expanse of the family estate toward her father's study, Anita unwittingly witnessed a conversation that could turn the fates of everyone in her family upside down. It turned out that Arabella, her sister, was faced with an unexpected ailment, memory loss, a disease that shrouded her life in a fog of mystery, for none of the invited doctors could explain the causes of her condition. In this confusion, Anita's mother showed determination, declaring that Anita's engagement to Axion should be broken off immediately. Her words sounded like a verdict, for she feared that rumors of Arabella's illness might destroy not only the girl's reputation, but also affect the welfare of the entire family. The eldest daughter, Arabella, her mother thought it possible to marry Axion, while circumstances still allowed it and rumors did not spread throughout high society. Anita's father, however, met these words with a certain doubt, suggesting that Arabella could even become the consort of a prince if the cards were played right. His words hung in the air like a distant dream that could bring the family not only glory but also unprecedented benefits. But the mother was adamant. She did not want to give her eldest daughter in marriage to a man famous for his love affairs and unable to remain faithful to one woman. The moment her father suggested that Anita needed to win the attention of the prince in order to thereby put her engagement to Archduke Axion behind her, the atmosphere in the room became tense. These words caused a storm of emotions in Anita's soul. She felt anger and disappointment fill her heart. The decision made without her consent was the last straw. Anita came to the conclusion that her attempts to maintain a relationship with her parents had been in vain, and now she no longer wanted to make the effort. Her irritation increased at the thought of her father taking her loyalty and devotion to the family for granted, believing that family ties imposed an obligation on her to remain obedient and faithful. He seemed convinced that Anita would never dare to reject her parents' plans and wishes, relying on the strength of family tradition and the authority of the Renati surname she bore. However, deep down Anita realized that despite her noble origins and belonging to the House of Renati, her parents had never truly considered her part of the family in the full sense of the word. This alienation and misunderstanding on the part of her loved ones only encouraged her to think that it was time to find her own way, independent of the desires and ambitions of her father and mother. Henceforth, Anita was firmly resolved to take her destiny into her own hands, refusing the coercion and restrictions imposed by family patterns and expectations. Within the luxurious walls of the palace, where every whisper and glance could tell a story, rumors about Anita's origins were spreading that made her feel like an outsider among her own family. Although she bore a noble surname and was part of high society, her lack of resemblance to her parents gave rise to speculation and gossip. The maids whispered, suggesting that Anita might have been adopted from the common people, making her the subject of endless discussion and speculation. Anita, whose dignity and honor were questioned by these baseless speculations, answered them with determination and severity. She tried to suppress the spread of rumors by taking harsh measures against those who dared to speak ill of her. Every maid who allowed herself to bring it up found that her services were no longer required. Anita realized that this gossip could only strengthen her sister Arabella's position, giving her the opportunity to take away what little Anita had, including Axion's attention. In her heart, Anita was convinced that she would not let this scenario play out. She was ready to fight for her place in the family and for her future, not to let gossip and speculation determine her fate. Despite the hostility and misunderstanding surrounding her, Anita remained steadfast, willing to stand up for her rights and interests in the fight for the justice and respect she deserves. On one of those days when the gravity of palace intrigue was particularly in the air, Hari came to Anita. This maid was more than just an assistant. She was a ray of light in the dark realm of conspiracies and secrets surrounding Anita. Harry brought news that could change the course of events. A knight named Rick Elmont, whose name was known far beyond their lands, had arrived at the manor. As a thank you for Harry's loyalty and support to Anita during these challenging times, Anita presented her with a beautiful hairpin. The gesture was not just a gesture of generosity, it was a recognition of the special bond that existed between them. The hairpin was not just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol of the gratitude and respect Anita felt for Harry. When Harry left the room, she couldn't take her eyes off the jewel in her hands. The moment made her realize how valuable her choice to serve Anita had been. For if it had been Harry's lot to be with Arabella, she would not have had such moments of joy and pride in her mistress. The jewelry in her hands was not only a token of appreciation, but a reminder that kindness and loyalty are sometimes rewarded in ways you wouldn't even dream of. In the depths of her musings, Harry was enveloped in a thin shroud of melancholy as she pondered the image of Anita, whom she perceived as an exquisite and delicate flower thriving in the sheltered atmosphere of the greenhouse. This flower, in her eyes, was unprepared for the merciless gusts of the real-world wind, which only made her more anxious. Burdened by these musings, Harry felt disappointment at the simple but meaningful gesture Anita had not followed today, the affectionate touch, the stroking of her head, that had always been a source of comfort to her. Meanwhile, in another part of the castle, Anita was making her way towards a new day, descending the stairs to greet Knight Elmont. Her steps were full of anticipation of the meeting, for every such meeting was filled with the exchange of news and lively emotions. The knight, for his part, greeted her with a smile, his eyes sparkling with joy at seeing her again, the first in so long. Rick, not hiding his enthusiasm, openly admitted that their meeting was long overdue and his appearance here was no accident. He confessed that it was the desire to see each other that had brought him here. During the conversation, Rick shared his impressions of the recent events in the north where they had won a victory. However, he did not embellish the reality by pointing out that their success was modest and not as significant as it might seem at first glance. Moreover, he admitted that despite the victory, he had a hard time adapting to the harsh climate of those places. These words told of his feelings and experiences, of how even a warrior accustomed to hardship can face insurmountable challenges. One day, in a moment of genuine curiosity and a thirst for understanding of her circumstances, Anita approached Axion with a question that had long plagued her. She wanted to get to the bottom of the reasons for his family's unwavering loyalty to the Emperor. For it seemed they had the ability to do otherwise, to refuse to do his bidding, especially given their status and influence. Axion, a man who always weighed his every word, shared with her that their family was on a long search for something of great significance in the northern lands. This quest was so important and mysterious that their blind obedience to the Emperor allowed them to avoid unnecessary attention and suspicion from the authorities and others. This mission, shrouded in a veil of secrecy, became another layer in the mosaic of their family history. It had been a long time since then, and now that Rick had returned from the north, Anita wondered again about the mysterious purpose that had driven the Axion family. She wondered if they had succeeded in finding what they had hunted so hard for in the harsh northern lands. Meeting Rick, who had just returned from those very same places, had caused her to think and at the same time prompted her to express relief at his return. Anita didn't hold back and expressed to Rick her surprise and joy that he was lucky enough to return before winter set in. In the midst of their conversation, as the words flowed one after another, forming bridges of understanding and mutual interest, the air in the room was suddenly filled with a tension that foreshadowed an unexpected development. This unexpected turn began with the arrival of the Marquise, who complained loudly about not knowing about the arrival of the knight from the Archduke of Rakide. The Marquise's displeasure was clear and distinct. She made no secret of her irritation that important events were taking place in her house without her knowledge. However, as she crossed the threshold of the room, she masterfully changed her expression to a mask of outward grace and a lady full of nobility and grace. With a hypocritical smile, she apologized for her intrusion, as if she had unwittingly become a nuisance to those present. Rick, whose reputation and manners were always impeccable, responded to the gesture with equal elegance. With a polite bow, he introduced himself to the Marquise, showing respect for her status and personality despite the suddenness of her appearance. The Marquise, for her part, showed surprise, skillfully playing on emotion as if she were amazed and at the same time flattered that the deputy commander himself had taken the time to arrive in person to present her with an invitation to a tea party. Rick decided to dutifully declare that he had obeyed the order because it concerned Anita personally, that his arrival was due to the fulfillment of an order directly related to Anita. The atmosphere in the room became even more tense. The Marquise, whose tranquility had been disturbed by this revelation, did not conceal her surprise, declaring that she had not even suspected any connection between Anita and the Knights. Rick, without losing his dignity and composure, replied that Anita's connection to Rakid Manor was much deeper than it might seem at first glance. He recalled that Anita had saved Axian's mother, thus emphasizing her importance to all the people of the manor. The Marquise, unwilling to recognize the significance of Anita's act, haughtily remarked that it was a matter of bygone days, and that it was none other than the doctor, not Anita, who had played the key role in the rescue. At this point, Rick could barely contain the impulse of indignation within himself at such an ignorant and ungrateful attitude of the Marquise. Despite his emotions, he continued to hold back even as the Marquise began to question him about the details of the tea party invitation. When the Marquise extended her hand to take the invitation, thus demonstrating her superiority and right to control the events of the house, Anita decisively intercepted the initiative. With dignity and firmness, she stated that the invitation was addressed to her and not to the Marquise, thus emphasizing her role and importance in the matter. Anita said that it would be rude of her mother to read someone else's invitation. As Anita printed the invitation, the scent of roses gently enveloped the room, awakening memories and feelings. Axian's attention to detail, such as the rose petals inside the envelope, deeply moved Anita. Her heart filled with warmth at the thought of the upcoming meeting, and she didn't hesitate to tell Rick that she would definitely attend Axian's tea party, asking him to pass on that promise. The Marquise, on the other hand, saw this event as an opportunity for Arabella. Despite her previously demonstrated resentment and distrust of Anita, the Marquise began to make plans to use the tea party to her advantage. She loudly expressed her concern for Arabella, emphasizing that unlike Anita, Arabella had never participated in social events and would benefit from such an experience. It was a clever move to ensure Arabella's presence at the event so that Axian would see that Arabella was much better than Anita and marry the older daughter. Anita, understanding the Marquise's intentions, did not object. Instead, she decided to play along with her mother by offering to take Arabella with her. Marquise asked Rick excitedly if Rick was okay with it, and he nodded, saying that it was Anita's will. Rick said he had to go back, and that was the end of it. After Rick's departure, the Marquise, left alone with Anita, quickly turned the conversation to a more unpleasant topic for her, the arbitrary dismissal of maids, which included the Marquise's own maid. The Marquise was clearly unhappy with Anita's decision, perceiving it as an interference in her personal affairs and a possible weakening of her authority. Anita, on the other hand, remained calm and confident in her actions. She explained to the Marquise that the maids were insulting the honor of their masters by spreading gossip and misinformation, which could have serious consequences for the reputation of the entire estate. Anita stressed that her decision to dismiss the maids was not only to protect her own dignity, but also to prevent the spread of rumors that could have spread beyond the estate and damaged the Marquise's reputation in the wider community. It was only after all this that the Marquise accepted the dismissal of her maids, but she had something that she considered even more important. There was soon to be an audience with the Empress for her sister, Arabella, and Anita was called to accompany her to provide her sister with support and reassurance at this important moment. However, the hidden meaning behind this decision did not escape Anita's attention. She realized that her mother, the Marquise, had much deeper intentions than mere sisterly support. Anita understood that the Marquise saw the upcoming audience as a unique chance to present Anita as a potential candidate for the role of the prince's wife, if, of course, the Empress expressed a desire to see Anita as her future daughter-in-law. This state of affairs could lead to a drastic turnaround in Anita's personal life. Her engagement to Axian could be annulled without any hesitation. Anita, feeling the weight of the decision resting on her shoulders, tried to buy time. She gently remarked that it would be worth first obtaining the Empress's own approval for her presence in the palace. But the Marquise, whose plans were much more thorough and decisive, dismissed this argument as already decided. Standing up from the table and looking at her daughter with unyielding certainty, the Marquise left no room for doubt that Anita had to accept the inevitable. Axion must belong to Arabella. At the tea party, bathed in the warm light of the afternoon sun, Axion and his mother were discussing family matters when the conversation necessarily turned to Anita. Sadness tinged Axion's voice as he admitted that his lover's affairs had not improved, and things were as bad as they had always been. It made his mother remember Anita's words about wanting to move as far away from the family as possible once she reached adulthood. This desire for Anita to be away from her own home made her sad, but also made her realize the depth of the problems the girl faced in her surroundings. Axion's mother, despite the gravity of the realization that Anita wished to break with the family ties, still understood the girl's reasons for such a decision. In an effort to offer support and refuge, she offered Anita the opportunity to live with them until she reached adulthood, giving her the chance for a calm and protected environment where she could escape the pressures and demands of her family. However, feeling strongly about her responsibility to her family, despite the gravity of the circumstances, Anita replied that she could not accept such an offer. Her refusal was due not only to a sense of duty and loyalty, but also to the realization that such a move could be perceived as irresponsible to her parents, even though the relationship within the family was complex. Axion's mom, sitting across from him at the table, suddenly spoke words full of regret and sadness, opening her heart to her son. She admitted that she had done everything she could to save Anita from her unbearable home environment, and now she felt like she had missed her chance when she had the opportunity to bring Anita to her. These words emphasized the deep emotional connection and genuine care that Axion's mother felt for Anita, seeing her not just as her son's lover, but as a girl so desperately in need of support and understanding. Meanwhile, in her room, Anita sat alone, eating dinner by herself, as she was forbidden to join her family in the dining room. The reason for this was the accusation that she had been acting too rough lately. This isolationist sentence seemed particularly cruel to her, against the fact that only yesterday her parents had insisted on the importance of family dinners, declaring that it was in Arabella's best interest for all family members to get together. Such contrasting situations in Anita's life and in Axion's home emphasized the depth of the differences between their worlds. On the one hand, there was Axion's family, where understanding and sympathy, willingness to help and support reigned. On the other side was Anita's world, full of restrictions and conventions, where even within her own family she faced rejection and loneliness. The doors of her room creaked quietly as the butler of the Marquis's house appeared, a man usually secretive and reserved, but this time his gaze betrayed nervous tension. With the words that her father required her presence, he introduced a surprise into her evening. Anita, without losing her dignity, rose instantly, ready to follow the invitation. But her eye, shrewd and keen, caught something unusual in the butler's demeanor that made her linger. His gaze, wavering between respect and doubt, did not go unnoticed. With an ease that was unique to her, Anita ordered him to express his thoughts aloud, giving him no opportunity to avoid answering. The butler's disclosure of the nature of the Marquise's request, wishing to shift to his daughter the responsibility for matters he himself should have borne, was met by Anita not with irritation, but with a playful smile. Her reply, light but clear, was a clear warning. Any careless word could cost him his place in this house. As she walked past, leaving the butler in a state of mixed feelings, Anita confirmed her undisputed influence within the family circle. Butler, realizing that the young woman not only had the power to decide his fate on the estate, but was also capable of mercy. He nodded proudly in respect and acceptance of her instruction, deciding that he should hold his post as long as possible for the sake of Mistress Anita. This moment was not just an exchange of lines between mistress and servant, but a discovery of the underlying dynamics of a relationship where the ability to read between the lines and mastery of the art of unspoken threats are crucial to maintaining order and power. When Anita arrived at the Marquise's study, she found her father busy with the usual business of the estate and the immense amount of documents that were always piling up on his desk. The Marquis, wasting no time in preamble, went straight to the point of his daughter's visit. With an ease that might have appeared to an outsider with indifference, he put her in charge of another batch of documents. His words that Anita doesn't go anywhere anyway sounded less like a reproach than a statement of fact, for he thought she would have plenty of time, 4 whole days, to sort out the paperwork. This moment made Anita think deeply. After Arabella had returned to the family, her life had changed dramatically. Her parents had turned their backs on her, forbidding her to leave the estate and restricting her communication with the outside world. Now, in her father's words, she heard an accusation of her own isolation, even though she was in this situation by no choice of her own. Since childhood, helping her father with chores, she had been aware of her position in the family, invisible, unnecessary, always in the shadow of her missing sister. This reality left her with no choice but to accept the role she had been given and secretly prepare for the day she would come of age to cut ties once and for all with the family that valued her so little. However, despite the complexity of her inner feelings and the realization of her own insignificance in the eyes of her loved ones, Anita did not lose her determination. Her intention to maintain the fortunes and welfare of the family while she was still bound to it spoke of a deep devotion and sense of duty to family tradition. It was a quiet act of courage and self-sacrifice that she performed daily, maintaining the countenance of her home despite personal feelings and aspirations. Her father's sudden question broke the silence between them, as he, noticing Anita's silence, suggested that her silence came from fear of the task ahead, which he ironically called lightness. Unexpectedly, Anita found the strength and wit to respond to this challenge. With a slight, barely perceptible smile on her lips, she suggested to her father, with equanimity and evident irony in her voice, that since he considered the task so insignificant, she should undertake it herself. Her words, full not only of challenge but also of implicit criticism, provoked an immediate outburst of emotion in her father. The Marquis, unable to restrain his outburst of indignation, exclaimed that his purpose was to teach Anita independence, to prepare her for her future role as mistress of the Reikaday house. But Anita, not relenting, boldly met his arguments with her own remark about her mother, who as mistress of the house never touched papers, thus emphasizing that traditions and duties were distributed differently in their family and that the Reikaday house was no different in this respect. This exchange reached its climax when the father, losing control of his emotions, suddenly slapped the table. This gesture was not just an expression of anger or frustration, it symbolized a deep fissure between father and daughter, a disagreement over responsibilities and roles within the family. Anita, boldly and decisively, confronted her father, declaring her unwillingness to take on the exorbitant responsibility the Marquis was trying to place on her. Her words that Axion, unlike her father, would not shift his responsibilities to her emphasized her desire for fairness and equality in the distribution of family responsibilities. This moment was not just an expression of Anita's personal dissatisfaction. It symbolized her rejection of traditional submission and the beginning of finding her own way. The Marquis's silence after her words was evidence of his inability to counter-argue or offer a solution to the conflict. Anita's subsequent rejoinder, in which she urged her father to deal with his own affairs, sounded like the final verdict of their dispute. This moment emphasized not only her fatigue from the constant struggle for recognition in the family, but also her desire to change the established order. Anita's departure, accompanied by her father's shouts, urging her to reflect on her own behavior, and the subsequent slamming of the door, symbolized the generation gap in the Reikaida household. A week later, Anita was on the road, drowning in deep thought. As she sat in the carriage, she weighed every piece of information that had reached her. She was sure that her mother would stop at nothing to see Arabella within the walls of the Archduchy, despite all possible obstacles. Anita's heart filled with anxiety and involuntary aggression at the thought of the uncompromising methods her mother might have resorted to in order to achieve her goals. However, trying to push the gloomy thoughts away, she took a deep breath, trying to free herself from the weight of her accumulated feelings. Turning her attention to Arabella, who sat across from her and looked confused and lost in her musings, Anita decided to get her sister talking. Arabella, gathering all her will in her fist, looked Anita straight in the eyes. With a deep sense of responsibility and sincerity in her voice, she declared that she refused to follow their mother's designs. She was determined not to let her mother's plans ruin the warm and strong relationship that bound her to Anita and to Axion, around whom the whole scheme revolved. Arabella emphasized that the bond between the sisters was far more important than any intrigue, and she had no intention of betraying that bond for selfish purposes. Anita decided to continue the conversation, but her tone was devoid of any emotion, which made her question especially important. She asked Arabella what kind of happiness she wished for her and Axion, trying to understand the depth of her sister's thoughts. Arabella, smiling somewhat embarrassed in response to such a serious question, shared her belief that true happiness lies in being together with those you love, despite any obstacles and hardships that fate may bring. Her words were simple, but they contained a deep truth about the inseparability of true feelings and the importance of support and understanding between loved ones. Anita, thoughtfully perceiving her sister's words, could not help but feel doubts about the truthfulness of such an idealized view of life. The thought flashed through her mind that such statements might seem naive or even ridiculous, but Arabella quickly answered Anita's skepticism by explaining that this understanding of happiness and relationships had been instilled in her by the simple people who had once picked her up when she was lost as a child. Arabella remembered with warmth those who had given her support and a roof over her head in difficult times, certain that the family was now living happily ever after, thanks to their father's promise to send them gold in gratitude for his daughter's care. Anita, on the other hand, realized that their parents were not so kind. In an atmosphere of accumulated tension and anxiety, Arabella expressed her categorical unwillingness to marry Axion with open naivety, thus seeking to ease Anita's state of mind and emphasize her support. She wanted to show that she was willing to be a support for her sister in this difficult position, even if it meant opposing their mother's will. Anita, for her part, anxiously asked Arabella if their mother knew about her decision, to which Arabella replied in the negative, shaking her head vigorously. This gesture only increased Anita's anxiety, who realized with a heavy sigh that their mother would stop at nothing to carry out her designs without considering her daughter's wishes and feelings. This moment was filled with deep symbolism, emphasizing the gap between the pursuit of personal happiness and the pressures of family obligations and expectations. Anita bitterly recognized that their mother would be indifferent to her daughter's personal preferences and feelings, and she was willing to disregard them to achieve her goals. This realization added weight to Anita's shoulders as she realizes that they face a difficult choice between their own happiness and fulfilling a family duty imposed by their mother. In the secluded garden of Axion, where every turn of the path hid a new wonder, Arabella felt an exhilarating sense of wonder and delight. Surrounded by extraordinary beauty, she could not hide her amazement. The place was so picturesque that it was as if it embodied everything she had ever dreamed of, surpassing her wildest expectations. Axion, observing her reaction, shared his reflections. He argued that if he had known in advance that the weather would be so fine, he would not have hesitated to suggest that they meet on the shores of Lake Alkente. It was a place even more mesmerizing in its beauty, where the water shone under the rays of the sun, giving the impression of magic. Arabella, however, fully immersed in the atmosphere of the garden, recalled that the place of their present meeting was beautiful in itself, and she liked it here just as much. Her gaze was fixed on one of the flowers, which stood out among the others for its brightness and unusual appearance. With curiosity and tenderness, she approached Axion with a request, asking if she could touch and smell the scent of this amazing plant. From outside, watching the scene unfold in the garden, Anita couldn't take her eyes off her sister, Arabella. Arabella's attention was completely absorbed by one of the flowers, which she decided to examine closer. This flower, known as lovin, seemed particularly alluring, and Arabella, unable to contain her curiosity, leaned over to inhale its fragrance. After she took a deep breath, you could read on her face the strange sensation that had overwhelmed her. Nevertheless, she assured that the flower's fragrance was incredibly pleasant. A moment later, however, the situation changed dramatically. Anita, still watching her sister, noticed how Arabella's face suddenly turned pale, as if her skin color had mixed with the surrounding air, giving her a ghostly appearance. It was so sudden that Anita didn't even have time to react. Before Anita could come to her aid or even realize what was happening, Arabella fell softly to the ground unconscious. That moment frozen in time, leaving Anita in a state of shock and helplessness as she watched her sister lie unconscious amidst the splendor of a garden that had just been filled with an atmosphere of peace and beauty. When consciousness returned to Arabella, she found herself lying in an unfamiliar room, surrounded by a stillness and silence that seemed to her at that moment something external and distant. The first thing that caught her eye was the figure of Axion, who sat beside her bed, gazing into her face with an expression of care and attention. His presence in this silent room seemed to be the only connection to the reality that was slowly coming back to her after her sudden fainting spell. Suddenly realizing that she was not where she should be, Arabella jumped up on the bed, gripped by excitement and nervousness. Her eyes, full of questions and confusion, searched her surroundings for answers. Axion, remaining unperturbed and calm, quickly hastened to allay her fears, explaining that she had fainted in the garden, after which she had been brought here so that she could safely recover. His voice was full of sympathy, and he wondered how she was feeling after what had happened, trying to make sure she was okay. Instead of answering his question, however, Arabella's first reaction was alarm at Anita's absence. Her concern for her sister was immediately reflected in her voice and look. Axion, understanding her anxiety, hastened to assure her that Anita was safe in the doctor's company and that they would both be back soon. These words should have given Arabella some comfort, though she still felt lost in this unforeseen situation, surrounded by the walls of a room that, though filled with warmth, remained foreign and incomprehensible to her. In the back of the room, where soft light framed the contours of the furniture, creating a cozy atmosphere, Arabella gazed at Axion. Her thoughts involuntarily drifted back to a recent conversation with her mother, in which the latter, not without a share of maternal intuition, had suggested Axion's possible feelings for her daughter. Her mother was convinced that Arabella was able to win the young man's attention, truly believing that a special bond could be born between them. However, Arabella, thoughtfully considering Axion, could not share this optimism. There was no doubt in her heart as to where Axion's feelings were actually directed. She noticed his eyes flirt with sparkles as he turned his gaze to Anita, as if every glance he gave toward his sister was filled with a special light and warmth that could not go unnoticed. In a moment of deep reflection, as silence began to fill the space, Arabella's hand suddenly clenched tightly on the soft blanket, as if the power of undisclosed feelings had suddenly awakened in her. Tension was in the air, heralding the moment of revelation. With a squeeze of not just her hand but of her heart, Arabella gained the resolve she needed and, turning to Axion, expressed her feelings for Anita with surprising openness and purity. Her words sounded like music, filled with sincerity and warmth. She confessed that her heart is full of tender feelings for Anita and that nothing is more important to her than to see Anita happy. This confession was not an easy one. With every word Arabella spoke, the air grew warmer and warmer, and in her eyes you could see glimmers of the purest and brightest feelings a person could experience. She had sworn to Axion with a heavy heart, but with unyielding determination in her eyes, that Anita's happiness was something she could not exist without. It wasn't just a word given to a friend, it was a vow made to fate itself. Axion, sensing the depth of her feelings, could not remain indifferent. His eyes flashed with the same sincerity as Arabella's. He answered her, confirming his desire to also devote himself to the endeavor of making Anita happy. There was a sense of steadfastness in his words and a willingness to go to any lengths to achieve this noble goal. A smile slowly spread across Arabella's face, reflecting deep satisfaction and confidence. It was the smile of a man who sees before him a clear path to the happiness of a loved one, a path she now knew Axion would be able to take, giving Anita joy and fulfillment of dreams. With the seriousness inherent in moments of important discovery, the doctor informed Anita of Arabella's unusual peculiarity. He revealed that she was found to have an extreme sensitivity to divine power, a phenomenon that, in a world where such things were valued and researched, was usually discovered in childhood. This discovery was not just a medical conclusion. It was a revelation that foretold an incredible path for Arabella and her entourage. After the revelation of Arabella's extraordinary sensitivity to divine power, Anita's thoughts involuntarily drifted to their parents, who were still unaware of the seriousness of her sister's condition. The thought floated in her mind that news of Arabella's illness had probably already reached the ears of their parents, and they were certainly waiting for their daughters to return home, full of anxiety and hope for their well-being. Reflecting on the journey ahead, Anita approached the doctor with a question regarding Arabella's ability to endure the journey. After receiving an affirmative answer from the medic, who confirmed that Arabella's condition made it possible to undertake the journey, Anita immediately decided to act. She ordered a carriage to be prepared for their forthcoming journey home, thus showing her determination and concern for her sister's welfare. With this decision, Anita hurried to Arabella to tell her the news and prepare her for the journey ahead. When Anita cautiously opened the door of the room, her ears were open to a quiet but warm dialogue between Arabella and Axion. She couldn't make out all the words, but she caught the happy smiles and scraps of phrases about wishes and dreams they shared with each other. At that moment, Anita had the impression that a declaration of love had taken place between them. The thought filled her heart with sadness and heaviness, for deep down she felt that Arabella and Axion were perfect for each other, far more than she herself and Axion ever could. Anita's musings took her far back in time to the days of her youth, when she first realized that her life's paths could be radically different from those prescribed by her family. Even if fate had divorced her and Arabella for 19 long years, Anita was determined, upon reaching adulthood, to sever all family ties, which would automatically make her engagement to Axion impossible. In this stream of thought, she still cherished the hope that despite all the twists of fate, she and Axion would be able to maintain their friendship. Thus, standing at the threshold of the room, consumed by her thoughts and feelings, Anita faced the reality of feelings which can be as fickle and unpredictable as the wind. Leaving the room where the warm exchange between Arabella and Axion was taking place, Anita was absorbed in deep thought. She wondered what would be left for her if Axion turned away too, walked away, leaving her completely alone. These thoughts hovered in her mind, creating a sense of inevitability of impending loss that could be a new challenge for her. As time passed, another drama unfolded in the spacious halls of the Renati mansion. Anita's father, agitated and angry, began to reproach her for allegedly failing to care for Arabella properly, putting her in danger. Anita, without losing her inherent calmness and wit, parried the rebuke by pointing out that she had no medical knowledge to prevent her sister from fainting. The father, unable to find solace, continued to press his case, trying to find the culprit for the events that had taken place, and even went to the extent of accusing her of greed. In response, Anita remarked with a slight chuckle that she had apparently inherited this trait directly from him, skillfully shifting the arrows back to her father. She reminded him of how, in an effort to save money, he had driven away the people who had cared for Arabella in her childhood, only to not give them a crumb of his wealth. This move by Anita left her parents in complete shock, not expecting such a witty and bold response from their daughter. She began by saying that Arabella still believed in their family's gratitude to those who had cared for her when she was an orphan, for a long 12 years. With special mention of the Marquise Renotti, Anita highlighted her role in Arabella's life, emphasizing that it was the Marquise who initiated Arabella's trip with her to Axion, leading Ariella to faint. The situation was sharply aggravated when the Marquis, having heard the conversation, involuntarily gave vent to his emotions and, in a fit of anger, swung at Anita. But the Marquise, with coldness and cruelty, managed to restrain her consort by reminding him of the important event that lay ahead of Anita, for Anita was to attend a reception at the Empress herself. This incident left a deep imprint on Anita's soul. She felt tired and frustrated, which affected her willingness to share an important find, a document that could have made a difference. The recently discovered document seemed like a clue, but after what had happened, Anita felt that the discovery no longer had anything to do with her or affect her future. After a tense discussion of the events of the upcoming evening, Anita's mother suggested, not without irony, that the Marquis could afford to show his anger toward Anita after the formal events were over. However, Anita said that her father, the Marquis, would have to focus on solving his own problems, implying that he had enough worries of his own and that possible violence was not a solution to their intra-family issues. Later, in the privacy of her room, Anita faced the care of a maid who scrutinized her face for injuries. The maid, concerned about the possibility of bruising, insisted on applying something cold to the point of impact. But Anita, keeping her calm and composure, refused the offered help, saying there was no need for such measures. The maid suddenly shifted the topic of conversation to an event that had caused extensive discussion in their circle, Arabella's fainting. She began to inquire about the details of the incident, wondering what exactly had caused this reaction. However, Anita could not tell that Axion was behind the mysterious phenomenon in the garden when the flower was enveloped with divine power. This discovery was made for the purpose of a certain experiment, but the unexpected result of that experiment, Arabella's fainting, caused Axion to fall into a state of anxiety. He feared that Anita might be disappointed in him after what he had seen. Late in the evening, as the silence of the night enveloped the estate, Anita, lying in her bed, fell into deep thought. She thought back on the day's events and pondered how things would be different if she admitted that she was truly disappointed in Axion. These thoughts caused her to think again about what Axion was really afraid of. The question about his fears and doubts became not just rhetorical, but a key to understanding the depths of his soul. In a shady corner of the garden where roses bloomed lushly, enveloping the air with a sweet fragrance, a quiet drama unfolded. Little Anita, like a little fairy who has lost her way among the flower thickets, chose this secluded spot to immerse herself in her meditations. She wondered what was wrong with her, why she was treated with such warmth and care within the walls of the Duke's house, where she had temporarily found shelter, as opposed to the cold reception in her own home. This girl, whose soul was so pure, could not even in her thoughts recognize herself as worthy of the love and care she was receiving. With every minute spent in meditation among the flowers, her little heart filled with longing, and her breathing became more and more intermittent, as if the weight of heavy thoughts were becoming an unbearable burden. At these moments she felt so lonely and forgotten that even the splendor of the garden around her could not comfort her troubled soul. But suddenly, like a ray of light through the clouds, Axion burst into her seclusion, worried and determined to find Anita. His appearance was unexpected, but just the kind that could dispel the clouds of doubt in her heart. Axion, being a symbol of hope and safety, was instantly able to chase away the shadows surrounding Anita, and having him by her side seemed to promise that soon all her troubles and doubts would be left behind. Anita lived with a constant fear in her soul, a fear that stemmed from the assumption that Axion, that noble and strong protector, had hatred for her. Since that epic moment when she had shown extraordinary courage in saving the Archduchess from imminent disaster, Anita and Axion had not exchanged a word. This silence seemed an eternity to her, filled with heavy forebodings and shadows of doubt that deepened her conviction that the world around her was full of hatred for her, that even noble souls like Axion could not treat her differently. However, when Axion took a step towards Anita, his eyes sparkled not with hatred but something much warmer and deeper. With words imbued with sincerity and confidence, he dispelled all her doubts by declaring that hating her was a feeling totally foreign to his heart. At that moment, Anita felt the invisible shackles that had been clutching her heart begin to dissipate like fog in the morning sunlight. Axion, standing before her like an embodiment of valor and honor, became a living proof that in this world there is a place for sincere and pure feelings that can overcome the darkness of doubts and fears. The moment Axion, as if the embodiment of nobility and caring, extended his hand to Anita, a silence filled with expectation hung in the air. Anita, overcoming her inner doubts and fears, slowly, with a slight but noticeable delay, responded to his gesture by extending her hand in return. This moment was her first exceptional experience of human touch that she was able to truly feel and accept. The warmth of his palm, the firm yet gentle grip of his fingers was something completely new and startling to her, so much so that everything else receded into the background for a moment. In that magical moment, when the two souls touched each other through the warmth of their palms, Anita was so absorbed in the novelty and depth of her sensations that she didn't notice the storm of emotions raging in Axion's eyes. The despair that flashed in his gaze remained invisible to her, but in those moments when their hands locked, his eyes reflected the depth of his experience, which he might never have been able to put into words, but which was as real and powerful as Anita's most vivid feelings. There was a tension in the manor that could be felt with every step through its ancient corridors. Amidst the summer heat, when nature was in full bloom, a drama of its own was unfolding within the walls of the place. The maids, gripped by anxiety and tireless care, glided like shadows through the halls and rooms, trying to bring relief to Axion, whose condition worsened with each summer. This mysterious disease, recurring year after year, seemed incurable, causing silent despair in everyone. In the heart of this turmoil, the Archduchess, a woman of unwavering spirit and power, made the decision to give respite to one of her faithful maids. Ella, who had labored day and night to alleviate Axion's suffering, was given a chance to rest. The Archduchess, realizing that caring for a sick person is an ordeal that requires not only physical but also moral strength, wanted to somehow support her maids during this difficult period. However, when the conversation turned to Anita, the atmosphere in the room suddenly changed. Ella, with trepidation in her voice, shared a terrifying discovery. While helping Anita to change her clothes, she found many wounds and bruises on the girl's body, as if someone or something had seriously injured her. This discovery created a new wave of anxiety, for no one could remain indifferent to such suffering. The Archduchess's reaction was immediate. She, concerned about Anita's fate, ordered that her wounds be immediately treated with holy water. In her voice she sounded not only authority but also deep compassion for the unfortunate girl. In that quiet corner of the manor where their conversation took place, Ella shared a nuance she had noticed that might shed light on obscure aspects of what was happening. She mentioned that Anita's family had recently acquired an heirloom with the unique ability to identify blood ties. The Archduchess, a woman whose thinking was perceptive and sharp, instantly grasped the connection between Arabella's recent return and the mysterious wounds covering Anita's body. The contours of a big picture began to take shape in her mind, where every detail was crucial. She realized that what she was facing was not just a family drama, but something that required immediate and thoughtful intervention. As soon as this thought settled in her mind, the Archduchess was urgently summoned to the study. With a sense of incompleteness, she left the room, but in the corridor her attention was drawn to the figure of Anita. Without wasting a moment, the Archduchess decided to use this chance encounter to talk to the girl. Anita, standing before her, was the personification of anxiety and concern, so strong that it almost materialized in the air around her. Her concern for Axion was so genuine and deep that the Archduchess felt it almost physically. In an attempt to comfort the girl, she addressed her with words of reassurance, trying to lighten her burden of worries and concerns. At the same time, she asked Anita to remain silent about Axion's ailments in front of others, wanting to protect him from unnecessary worry and possible gossip that could only make the situation worse. The Archduchess, determined to make out what was happening, turned to Anita with a question about her wounds. The girl, as if trying to dispel the heavy atmosphere by her words, brushed away her anxiety with a slight smile. Anita's words that she only had minor wounds sounded like an attempt to minimize the significance of her suffering, as if she was trying to protect those around her from unnecessary anxiety for herself. The Archduchess, whose heart was filled with care, could not leave these words unheeded. She asked Anita to be open and share her worries and pains, offering her support and help. Her words were filled with a genuine desire to help and an offer to be there for her when Anita needed it. But Anita, a girl growing up and realizing her responsibilities as a member of the land-owning family, respectfully and with a certain amount of stubbornness declined the offer. She stated that it was time to take on the responsibilities of her status and get to work. As the tense atmosphere in the room reached its climax, Anita's words suddenly cut through the silence, leaving the Archduchess in a state of profound shock. It was evident that the aristocrat's wise and weighty eyes flashed with alarm, for she immediately caught the invisible threads that bound the girl to her father's beliefs. This realization made the Archduchess hastily seek a way out of the vicious circle of conversation that had been created, which could lead to unwanted discord. Realizing the importance of preserving harmony and trust in their relations, the Archduchess, with a grace worthy of great diplomats, changed the direction of the conversation to a safer course. Her offer to Anita to spend time in Axion's company was made with such warmth and care that it was impossible to refuse. And when Anita, showing her openness and readiness for new pursuits, accepted the offer, the Archduchess did not conceal her relief and joy. The Archduchess, with her keen sense and deep understanding of human nature, saw in Anita not only a little girl, but also a future personality with pronounced traits of mercy and love. In a room where silence reigned, broken only by the slight sounds of the night, Anita stood at the headboard of Axion's bed like a guardian at the gate of peace and safety. She gently held his hands in hers, which were as cold as a winter morning, trying to convey the warmth of her heart and soul through touch. At that moment, Axion, on the verge of dream and reality, uttered the word sweetheart in a half-awake voice, causing Anita to freeze in thought. To whom was the word addressed in his dream? Could it be an echo of a distant memory, or just a dream in which she herself could be the heroine? In this silence, when every sound seemed louder, Anita sank into her thoughts, pondering how much calmer and safer the Archduke's house seemed to her compared to her own home. It was a place where she could forget for a moment her fears and anxieties that so often visited her in her nightmares. The thought crossed her heart that perhaps it would be better if she, and not Axion, was the one having nightmares in her dreams. Anita felt empowered and resilient, for she had already learned to deal with the horrors that so often disturbed her peace. Axion slowly returned from the realm of Morpheus, feeling pleasantly tired after a deep sleep. His gaze, barely opening his eyes, immediately fell on the small figure sleeping peacefully at the foot of his bed. It was Anita who, even in her sleep, continued to hold his hand tightly, as if afraid of losing the connection even in the distance of dreams. The sight filled his heart with warmth and care, and he, with a tenderness that seemed extraordinary to himself, gently released his hand and carried Anita to the bed, so that she could continue her sleep in a more comfortable and appropriate place. Under the warm blanket he had carefully covered her with, Anita seemed calm and secure. But looking at her peaceful face, Axion noticed shadows of worry running across her features. It became obvious to him that in the depths of her consciousness, a drama of nightmares was playing out from which she could not protect herself. At that moment, he felt an overwhelming desire to help her, to take these horrors upon himself so that she might find comfort in the tranquility of sleep. With that thought, Axion reached up to her head, gently touching her temple. And after a few moments, the heavy shadows of nightmares began to leave her mind, giving way to calm and peace. After making sure Anita was no longer tormented in her sleep, Axion leaned back on the pillows, sighing with relief, and at the same time with a heavy weight on his heart at the realization that he had taken her nightmares upon himself. At that moment, his thoughts drifted back to their first meeting, to the day fate had brought them together. He couldn't help but recognize that a lot had changed since then, and he was genuinely glad their paths had crossed. This meeting was the beginning of more than just a friendship. It was the beginning of a story in which they both became not just the heroes of their own lives, but an indispensable support for each other in a world where dreams and reality are sometimes intertwined so closely that it becomes difficult to distinguish between them. In the distant past, the founder of a great empire, in an effort to consolidate power and ensure peace in his vast dominions, decided to divide the lands into two powerful archdukes. To do so, he endowed two chosen families with divine powers, believing that such a gift would ensure the empire's prosperity and protection from any threats. But as time went on, it became clear that these gifts were more of a heavy burden, a curse that brought unforeseen trials and tragedies upon families. Lake Alkenti became the heart of darkness, the symbol of discord and suffering. This place, surrounded by dark legends and secrets, has become a dungeon with no exit, where once in, there is no way back. The lake, like a living organism feeding on fear and despair, became a nightmare for all who dared to approach its shores. In response to the constant threats posed by the place, guards were set up around the lake to guard and prevent any attempts to approach it, thus protecting the empire from the unknown evil lurking in its waters. However, despite all the warnings and prohibitions, Anita not only managed to get into the heart of this forbidden territory, but also found her way back, overcoming all the obstacles and challenges that beckoned her along the way. Her actions were not limited to her personal salvation. She was able to bring back Axion's mother from the lake, thus proving that even the most terrible curse can be overcome if there is hope and faith in the help and support of loved ones. The mystery of Lake Alkente and its mystical properties has long been shrouded in darkness. It was believed that without divine power or special intervention, it was impossible to get out of its chilling embrace. This assertion found confirmation in the story of Anita, whose extraordinary rescue from the lake sparked many rumors and speculation. Many have speculated that something supernatural played a role in her rescue, perhaps even the mystical creature of the lake itself, which for its own unknown reasons decided to help the girl. Axion, originally set on seeing Anita solely as his mother's savior, found his focus on her growing stronger every day. From the day Anita had done the impossible, escaping the lake and bringing his mother back with her, she had become something much more than a heroine to Axion. The Emperor's hunt for Axion, due to his unique divine abilities, created an atmosphere of constant tension and anxiety for Axion. A sense of danger haunted him even among those he considered his own, in the person of the servants of his house. The benevolence of the servants could not completely dispel the sense of alienation caused by the fear of betrayal or possible harm coming from those who might turn him over to the Emperor for their own gain or safety. In this atmosphere of constant tension and feelings of isolation, Anita became not just a savior or an object of sudden attraction for Axion, but a mental support, reminding him that he was not alone in his ordeal. Anita, who has survived her own hardships and has extraordinary fortitude, has become a mirror for Axion, a reflection of his own fears, hopes, and struggles. Seeing a reflection of himself in Anita, Axion felt his heart clench, not only because of sympathy, but also because of a deep empathy and understanding of her inner struggle. If Anita had divine powers similar to his own, it would make them even more alike, creating a unique bond between them based not only on personal feelings, but also on a deep understanding of the exclusivity of their situation. In that tragic moment when Anita disappeared from Axion's sight, a cold dread enveloped his heart. Thoughts of the possible eternal loss of Anita swirled in his head like dark whirlwinds, threatening to swallow up the last rays of hope. This fear was so palpable that Axion felt it with every fiber of his being, fearing that this feeling would become his eternal companion. However, when he found Anita, her eyes were full of tears and roses were blooming around her, creating a paradoxical feeling of beauty and bitterness at the same time. The moment Axion comprehended something profound and meaningful, the realization that his feelings for Anita were not dependent on her abilities or lack thereof. His love was unconditional, not requiring confirmation in the form of external trappings or gifts. He wanted to be near her, to share every moment, no matter what the circumstances. Time bore its fruits of reflection, and soon Axion came to a surprising conclusion. It became clear to him that he was even glad that Anita had no special power. This realization did not come immediately, but it was powerful and liberating. Deep down, he realized that thanks to this, Anita did not have to face the hardships and trials that fall on the shoulders of those with magical abilities. She was free of the struggle and inner strife he himself had experienced as he worked his way through the thorns to the stars. As if addressing her slumbering consciousness, he poured out his heart, making vows that were more than words. They were a reflection of his soul. He whispered in the half-darkness that he could never feel hatred for her, that even the thought of causing her grief or upset was foreign to him. Those words, spoken in the silence of the night, were filled with unwavering devotion and protection, a promise to keep their bond intact in the face of any adversity. But deep in his heart lurked questions that tormented him as much as the promises he made. Xian yearned for understanding, yearned to unravel the mysteries that surrounded Anita, her life that seemed so unfathomable. He did not leave him thinking of the strangeness of her existence, why the daughter of the marquises was left to suffer from hunger, why she was never accompanied by the servants who should have surrounded a representative of such a high estate. These questions kept him on his toes, for they touched Anita's very being, her well-being and happiness. Harry, the faithful maid, touches Anita's cheek with tenderness and care, leaving traces of healing ointment on it. At this moment, she endures the words of a strict injunction from Anita's father, who protects his daughter from the prying eyes of the world outside their domain. He requires his daughter to stay within the confines of the estate, hiding from everyone for a few days. Anita, whose heart is filled with mixed feelings, realizes the depth of what is happening. Her gaze, full of understanding and hidden pain, meets Harry's caring eyes. The maid whose hands carry the healing cannot hide her concern for the young lady's condition. She mentions the arrival of holy water, as if seeking any way to alleviate Anita's suffering, offering hope for a speedy healing. In return for her concern, Anita extends a few coins to Harry, a modest reward for her loyalty and service. But Harry, accepting the metal tokens of gratitude, seems puzzled. A shadow of guilt flickers in her eyes, as if she finds it unacceptable to be rewarded for what she perceives as her duty. This moment, filled with silence and unspoken words, leaves an imprint in the hearts of both heroines of a mutual understanding and deep connection that transcends the ordinary perception of duty and gratitude. After the fleeting exchange of sentiments is over, Hari, gathering her dignity and commitment to her duties, steps aside to perform her next task, preparing breakfast for Anita. In the soft light streaming through the window pane stood Anita, shrouded in a thin veil of her own undiscovered feelings. She was like a traveler in the fog of her thoughts, feeling an impenetrable longing in her heart that reminded her of a dream that had slipped from her memory, leaving behind only an echo of an inexpressible sense of emptiness. At this moment in time, in parallel, somewhere in a corner of her mind, there was Axion, who, immersed in thought, was recalling Anita's childhood words. Those words when, shining with an innocent, mysterious light, she had shared with him that she had a secret so heavy and significant that she couldn't share it with Axion. This moment was a kind of bargain of silence for them, entitling Axion to his own inviolable secret, which he in turn was not to divulge to Anita. Axion, weighing these memories, couldn't help but reflect that he knew a lot more about Anita than met the eye. He was aware of her unique ability to communicate with spirit, which raised questions as heavy as autumn clouds. As he thought about it, he couldn't avoid thinking about Arabella, who might have had a similar gift. These musings weaved through his mind, creating a web of guesses and assumptions that could turn their world upside down or merge it with new, uncharted threads of destiny. A messenger came to Axion with an important report concerning Arabella. The report concerned her unusual sensitivity to divine power, which could have far-reaching consequences. At this point, through a whip of thought and strategic assessments, Axion came to the conclusion that Arabella might not be as valuable an asset to the imperial family as it might have seemed at first glance. He, when considering the possibility of the prince's marriage to Arabella, decided that it could go through without obstruction from his family, as Arabella would not contribute significantly to the divine influence of the imperial family. Further, the speaker revealed another significant point. The Marquis is already preparing to assert Arabella's status during the upcoming rite at the Empress's house. This ritual, held annually in honor of the mystical beast of the lake, is a key event during which the imperial family seeks to discover among the nobility present persons gifted with divine powers. This event, filled with ancient traditions and mystical significance, provides a unique opportunity for Arabella to not only reaffirm her position in society, but perhaps reveal her true potential in front of the entire imperial family. It was well known in imperial family circles how critical it was to have information about individuals with divine powers, especially if such individuals were outside of their own lineage. This necessity stems from the desire to maintain a balance of power and to anticipate possible challenges to one's dominance. This time, circumstances were such that the Renaudi family, who had long avoided participating in the ceremony because of Arabella's disappearance and did not want to jeopardize Anita's safety, finally gave their consent for the ceremony to take place. The speaker cautioned Axion about the potential risk to Arabella during the ritual. It had been suggested that if someone resorted to healing magic during the ceremony, Arabella might pass out. This moment was of particular significance because such an outcome could serve as an unequivocal affirmation of her connection to divine power. In the event of her passing out, the imperial family will take steps to consummate a marriage alliance with Arabella without wasting any time. This maneuver would not only allow them to strengthen their ranks with a unique gift, but also to use it as a kind of detector of the presence of divine power in others, which would certainly be a strategic advantage in consolidating their power. Axion finds himself deep in thought. His attention was drawn to the relationship between Anita and Arabella. It was hard not to notice the distance between the two women, for not even the common words sister were spoken between them. Nevertheless, despite this apparent distance, Arabella wished nothing bad for Anita. On the contrary, she sincerely wished her happiness. This struck Axion, and he, inspired by this gesture of goodwill, decided to participate in the upcoming ritual so that he too could contribute to the well-being of the common cause. Meanwhile, in the privacy of her room, Anita found a temporary refuge from the responsibilities her father had imposed on her. Her bed became a temporary office where she tried to sort through a mountain of papers that seemed to have no end in sight. Amidst this chaos of paper, where each document seemed more important than the last, Anita found one that made her smile. This smile was not a simple smile of relief or satisfaction, it was a smile of victory and insight. She discovered that her father, with all his care and pedantry, had overlooked a tax evasion document. At that moment, Anita felt not only relief at having successfully discovered the mistake, but also a deep satisfaction that she had won a small victory in the endless struggle for her place in this world. Mysterious shadows of the past began haunting Anita 3 years ago, when she first encountered disturbing discrepancies in the family business's financial records. The further she dived into the analysis of these documents, the clearer it became that huge sums of money seemed to evaporate for no good reason. This discovery caused her to turn to her father for clarification, hoping that perhaps there was a logical explanation for everything that was happening. However, instead of answers or even attempts at comfort, she was met only with cruelty and misunderstanding that left a deep wound in her soul and body. It was at that moment that Anita realized that behind the facade of the official accounting department was a secret one with records manipulated by her father. Much has changed since then, and Anita is once again at the center of the family's financial affairs, but this time with a new understanding and goals. Her latest discovery sheds light on where the missing funds went. It turned out that they had been sent to a shrine, a place surrounded by mysticism and secrets, where an artifact of unprecedented power was kept. This artifact apparently played a key role in her father's plans, who sought to use it to find Arabella. The discovery not only confirmed her worst suspicions about double bookkeeping and hidden manipulation of finances, but also revealed the depth of the intrigue her family was embroiled in. Time was inexorably bringing Anita closer to the inevitable deadline. Only 4 months remained until the tax inspection was due to come with an audit. In this unequal confrontation with fate, Anita steadfastly resolved not to attempt to undo what seemed already incorrigible. Deep down, she recognized that avoiding punishment altogether was impossible. But her concern was not so much for her own future as for the well-being of those in her care. She sincerely hoped that the consequences of their family's actions would not affect the inhabitants of their lands, at least for the next decade. Anita couldn't help but feel a secret satisfaction at the thought that her parents, whom she considered short-sighted and selfish, would find themselves unable to even support a servant as a result of the tax audit. This prospect seemed to her a certain kind of justice, for in her opinion it was their actions that had led to the current crisis. Anita remained aloof in her thoughts about the future. She no longer feared or regretted her own fate. She was sober and aware of the fact that the Renati family's life would change beyond recognition, but it would not affect her. The coming days brought excitement and anticipation as Arabella prepared for an important rite that was to be performed. In anticipation of this event, the Marquis, as if anticipating the importance of the moment, made a special warning. Arabella would have to be so impeccable in her manners that her usual behavior would seem like child's play compared to what was expected of her. This warning made Arabella grip the oars of her own self-control tighter than ever. Walking down the stairs in the company of her mother, Arabella found herself in the center of attention where Anita was already waiting for them. She was wearing a dress that looked like it came out of a fashion designer's wildest dreams, capable of outshining the brilliance of any star in the sky. Arabella, always responsive and attentive to details, did not miss the opportunity to express her admiration for her sister's outfit, emphasizing its sophistication and beauty. However, Anita's reaction to the compliment was marred by a shadow of bitterness. With sadness, she noted that despite the outward attractiveness of their outfits, it was the design of her dress that unwittingly made Anita the center of attention. In the atmosphere of tense anticipation that hung in the air, the Marquise turned to Anita with an adamant look, emphasizing the need to make adjustments to her appearance, focusing on the fact that the tone of her face needed further refinement. However, Arabella, entering the discussion, easily refuted her mother's opinion, defending Anita's natural beauty and emphasizing the flawlessness of her skin, as if she wanted to emphasize that any attempt at improvement would only detract from her natural perfection. Anita, paying no heed to the sudden intrusion of Harry, who had rushed toward her with vague intentions, brushed her off with mild irritation, as if chasing away a pesky fly. With confidence in her voice and an unmistakable willingness to accept any challenges that might follow, she invited Arabella to join her. The Marquise, as if struck by her daughter's sudden refusal to obey her will, froze in place, stunned and perplexed. Her reaction was instantaneous. She rushed to her husband, the Marquis, in an attempt to find a solution to the crisis that had arisen. Their meeting was full of confusion and panic, while Anita, watching their confusion, took secret pleasure in the apparent imbalance of their emotions, savoring the sweetness of the moment of their helplessness. At the decisive moment, with unwavering confidence and a spark of defiance in her eyes, Anita interrupted their pointless debate. With a slight smile that lit up her face, she declared that the discussion was pointless. Her words sounded like a verdict, cutting off any attempt to object. With pride and an open smile, she announced that she would not hide the abrasion on her cheek. The sudden outburst of her father's voice, shrill and unexpected, caused Arabella to be unable to hide her fright. Without wasting a second, the Marquise sprang to her daughter, wrapping her arms around her in an attempt to comfort her. The Marquise's words, filled with concern, sounded like a soft melody meant to soothe Arabella's worries, emphasizing that the conflict brewing was personal and not meant for outside ears. Anita, with her usual determination and steadfastness, cut off any attempt at further discussion, as if putting an invisible boundary between her opinion and that of the others. At this moment, the castle came alive with the gossiping maids, who, without missing an opportunity to speculate, began to make their own theories. They confidently decided that Anita, driven by a desire to ruin Arabella's life, was doing so because of a simple dislike of the dress, turning an innocent grievance into a motive for intrigue. Arabella, with fortitude and firmness, decided to restore order among the maids. With an authority rarely heard in her voice, she set things straight, pointing out that the source of the sudden scream was their father, not Anita. Her words, however, passed like the wind through the ears of the maids, who had already formed their own opinions and were not ready to give up their preconceived notions, continuing to insist that Anita was to blame for everything. Arabella, with her pure heart and unwavering faith in goodness, remained at a loss as to the frankly unkind attitude that her family and even the most polite servants were showing toward Anita. In her eyes, Anita seemed nothing short of a hero, for not everyone in her place would have shown such determination and care in going in search of doctors when Arabella was faced with an unexpected fainting spell. This gesture of caring spoke for itself, building Anita's image in Arabella's eyes as the personification of compassion and willingness to come to the rescue. Moreover, the butler's stories only added color to the portrait of Anita as a true savior. After all, it is not every day that someone saves the Archduchess from imminent death under the icy waves. The butler's words, filled with respect and awe for Anita's action, only strengthened Arabella's conviction that it was impossible to remain indifferent to the injustice Anita was experiencing from others. Arabella's reflections on how ridiculous and unfair it was that the household could so misunderstand a man who had selflessly helped others led her to resolve to act. When it was time to depart and her parents ordered her to take her seat in the carriage first, she, in a show of protest and solidarity, opted for fairness. Consciously ignoring the orders, Arabella stayed true to her convictions by taking Anita's hand. This gesture was not just an act of rebellion against unwarranted prejudice. It was a statement of unbreakable bonding, of sisterly support, and a deep understanding of the true values of love, trust, and mutual aid. Arabella's steadfast declaration of her intention to attend the dialogue caused surprise even to Anita. It was something unexpected, given the usual course of events in their house. The parents, trying to maintain a semblance of benevolence, were anxious to send Arabella away, perhaps fearing that their true motives might be revealed in the presence of such an unbiased witness. Anita, on her part, was puzzled by Arabella's determination. In the back of her mind, Anita wondered if this was evidence of Arabella's genuine concern for her. But given the complexity of their family relationship and the prejudice their parents showed, Anita quickly dismissed the thought. It seemed incredible to her that Arabella could genuinely care for her, having been raised in a family that Anita thought was worthless. Nevertheless, the parents continued to insist on their position, claiming that all their actions stemmed from concern for Arabella's well-being. They expressed fears that Arabella might be tired and insisted that she go to the carriage. However, Arabella, showing a tenacity and determination never seen before, said she would take Anita with her. Arabella, holding her hand, gently guided Anita toward the carriage awaiting them, shrouding the moment with a thin veil of mystery and vague emotions that swirled in Anita's soul. Left at the foot of the carriage, Anita felt the stares of her parents, who, tirelessly, continued to instruct Arabella in the ways of etiquette and refinement necessary for an audience with the Empress herself. At this time, one of the attendants approached Anita, extending his hand as a sign of courtesy and willingness to escort her. His face was hidden behind a mask of indifference, however, and the look in his eyes spoke as if by invisible threads of unwillingness to be near Anita, adding an unpleasant note to the already tangled tangle of her thoughts. Anita, immersed in thought, remembered that this young man had not previously been listed as one of their family's guards. His appearance had been as sudden as a flash of lightning on a clear day, and now he stood there as if fate itself had brought him to the threshold of their home on the day Arabella had first crossed it. The young man's insistence that Anita leave the carriage as soon as possible only made her feel more uncomfortable. His annoying attempts to speed her exit led Anita, in a fit of irritation and a desire to protect her privacy, to decide to make a decisive gesture. With ease, but with enough confidence, she brushed his hand away and stepped on the young man's foot without hesitation. That moment was the spark that ignited in her not only a desire to assert her boundaries, but also a desire to learn more about her unwanted companion. Turning to the boy with a question that was more than mere curiosity, about his knowledge of chivalry, Anita sought answers not only to her own questions, but sought to see if this man before her was indeed the protector and warrior he tried to appear to be. Her gaze, piercing and searching, searched his eyes for the slightest sign of understanding of what being a knight truly was. The young man's answer was unexpected and, at the same time, revealed his true colors. His words, lacking even basic knowledge of chivalry, struck Anita as odd. How could a man who bore such a noble title know so little about the principles, ideals, and duties underlying the code of chivalry? This moment not only made Anita wonder about the authenticity of his knighthood, but also exposed to her the deep mystery of his personality. The guy stated that this included Anita, but Anita brushed it off and went to the ritual. But suddenly the guy stated that Anita was harassing Arabella. The Marquise, like a heroine facing an unseen threat, turned sharply to face the challenge head-on. Her gaze, filled with determination and strength, instantly braced the knight, like a sword drawn from its sheath, ready for battle. Anita's next look, however, was directed at her own mother, in whose eyes she searched for answers. Her mother, as if sensing her daughter's gaze, hastily began to justify herself, claiming that she was not the one who had incited the knight against Anita. But deep down, Anita knew the truth. She realized that the rumors about her were most likely coming from her mother, which made the betrayal all the more painful. With this new accusation hanging between them like a heavy curtain, Anita realized that she was faced with the task of not only exposing the true motives behind these actions, but also understanding why her own mother had chosen to turn against her in this way. At the moment when a thin thread of falsehood wrapped itself around the atmosphere in the room, Anita, with a skill worthy of an actress, put on a mask of persuasion and easily threw across her lips words of confidence in her mother. Her eyes sparkled with cunning while she wondered how a knight who hardly knew her by more than hearsay could already feel ill will towards her. With an irony imbued with poisonous appeasement, she suggested that her name must have been the subject of gossip behind her back by the maids, whom, by the way, she had just recently dismissed, adding fuel to the fire of her triumph by this action. But suddenly, like lightning piercing a clear sky, Anita moved on to another thought. She speculated that instead of perfecting his skills in training, this mysterious knight might have indulged in eavesdropping on other people's conversations, lurking in the shadows of the walls of her own home. This conclusion made her come to the decision that she no longer wished to see even a glimpse of him on the horizon of her life. With this request, she went to her mother, demanding that her father summarily dismiss the unwanted knight. The mother, trapped by her own emotions and caught in a whirlpool of sudden developments, could not find the strength to object. She could only agree, trying to keep the family ship afloat in this turbulent sea of unpredictability and mysterious intrigue. At last, Anita was satisfied with the fear of her own mother and the unknown knight, and they set out for the Empress. After long waiting and preparations, the moment of meeting the Empress had arrived. With the sound of footsteps echoing on the marble floors of the Grand Palace, the Marquise and her daughters, filled with awe and expectation, went to the audience. A maid, as if a messenger from another world, announced their arrival and, like a sorceress, opened the doors to the hall where the Empress was already waiting for them. Anita, the embodiment of nobility and grace, made her greeting with such naturalness and respect, as if she interacted with queens and empresses every day. Arabella, in spite of her efforts to conceal her thrill, curtsied clumsily and with a noticeable fear in her soul, carelessly betraying her nervousness before the majesty of the Empress. This moment was like a silent cry of her inner turmoil that echoed through the hall despite her attempts to remain calm. The Empress, ruler of destinies and keeper of traditions, seemed to be able to pierce through any soul with her gaze. Her order to look up sounded not just like a command, but like an invisible thread pulling the attention of everyone present to her. Despite her perpetually impenetrable and cold face, which remained so even after the tragic loss of her entire family in an accident, the Empress showed incredible composure. Her resilience and ability to maintain her dignity in any situation commanded deep respect and even some awe. This meeting was a test not only for Arabella, but also a confirmation of the unbreakable spirit of the Empress herself, able to stand firm even in the face of personal tragedy. There was talk among the nobility and courtiers that the Empress's imperturbability was only a mask behind which she hid her fear of wrinkles, trying to preserve the eternal youth of her face. However, despite these taunts and rumors spread behind her back, the Empress continued to be a symbol of stoicism and intransigence, not giving in to provocations and remaining true to her image as an unyielding monarch. A sudden turn in the audience occurred when the Empress, like a wind of change, decided to alter the course of events. A command came off her lips, obliging the Marquise and Anita to leave the hall immediately, leaving her alone with Arabella. The Marquise, agitated and anxious, tried to object, expressing her worry for her daughter, fearing that Arabella could not handle such an ordeal alone. But the Empress, with the same impenetrable imperturbability with which she had received them at the beginning of the audience, cut off any attempt at dialogue. She reminded her that Arabella was now 19 years old and that she had to learn to get along without her mother's constant presence at her side. The Empress's stern and decisive tone left the Marquise and Anita no choice but to comply and leave the hall, leaving Arabella alone with one of the most powerful women in the empire. In an intermission room filled with tense anticipation, Anita and her mother, the Marquise, shared a silence broken only by their excited heartbeats. Anita's sudden decision to seclude herself by moving away from the joint waiting area caused alarm to the Marquise. With a note of authority in her voice, the Marquise insisted that Anita stay close by, assuming that the Empress might wish to see her as well after her conversation with Arabella. Anita, however, expressed doubt that after the attention paid to her sister, she herself would be at the center of the ruler's interests. The Marquise, worried and a little embarrassed by this assumption of her daughters, insisted on caution, suggesting that she stay behind to await a possible summons. Anita, not giving in to entreaties, resolutely continued on her way to the exit, once again facing her mother's attempt to hold her back. But this time Anita, with an unexpected sternness in her voice, opened her cards by declaring that she was well aware of her mother's hidden intentions. This moment was a turning point in their dialogue, exposing the tension and misunderstanding present between them, leaving the Marquise in a state of amazement and bewilderment at her daughter's unexpected insight and determination. Anita's mother stood as if dumbfounded, enveloped in an aura of bewilderment and shock. Her eyes, wide with amazement, were directed into the void, unwilling or unable to comprehend the situation that had just unfolded before her. Anita, on the other hand, unlike her mother, displayed a model of calmness and confidence. Her steps away from her mother were determined and firm, as if she had already weighed everything and made the only right decision. There was a nascent confidence in her heart that the Empress, with whom the Rakid family did not have the warmest of relations, would not summon her again. The relationship between the majestic Empress and the Rakid family was strained, tangled like a tangle of snakes, making any attempt at meeting or dialogue unlikely. For Anita, who was on the verge of marrying Axion Raked, it meant only one thing: she really had no business being here. Her mother's last words to Anita were desperate and demanding. She shouted that Anita should return immediately at her first call, as if trying to keep some control over the slipping situation. But the answer was only Anita's stern, unyielding gaze. It was a look of determination and independence. A look that said that the days of being able to manipulate her decisions were in the past. In that moment, Anita didn't just leave her mother, she stepped into a new life where her own decisions and choices would determine the path forward. Strolling along the garden's winding paths, Anita sought solace and clues among its greenery and flowering alleys. The fresh air and silence of nature seemed meant to help her make sense of the events that had happened, to provide the long-awaited peace and quiet she so desperately desired. The same question kept circling in her mind. What could the Empress be talking to Arabella about? After all, by all assumptions, it was Arabella's arrival that the Empress was eagerly awaiting. Even her mother was convinced that a visit to the palace heralded significant news for Anita, perhaps even a marriage proposal from the prince. But reality, as it often happens, put everything in its place, turning out to be quite different prospects. At such a moment, when Anita's thoughts were consumed with pondering the future and the possible scenarios that awaited their family, was interrupted by an unexpected sound. The sound, sudden and out of place in the stillness of the garden, made her turn around. Behind Anita's back, hidden among the dense greenery of the bushes, sat a boy. His presence in such a place and at such a moment was so unexpected that Anita froze for a moment, trying to figure out what this child was doing alone, unsupervised, in a secluded part of the garden. His clothes, his manner, his gaze, all of it set him apart from the ordinary world of the garden, making his appearance mysterious and raising many questions. As Anita approached him, it became obvious that the boy's eyesight was far from perfect, which caused him to stumble awkwardly. At this critical moment, acting on instinct, Anita instantly reached out her hands and caught him, preventing him from falling. Her act brought gratitude to the boy's eyes, who, despite his confusion and uncertainty, clenched his fingers tightly around her hand. This unexpected and intimate touch confused Anita for a moment, leaving her in a state of mild shock at such an abrupt transition from loneliness and reverie to physical contact with a stranger. However, as suddenly as this brief connection had occurred, the boy realized, perhaps his violation of Anita's personal space, or simply frightened by his own audacity, and unclasped his hands. Embarrassment swept over his face, and there was an awkwardness in his eyes that indicated an inner conflict. Apparently realizing that his act could have been misinterpreted, the boy hurriedly ran away, leaving Anita standing there contemplating what had happened. This brief but intense exchange of emotions and gestures added a new chapter to a day already filled with surprises. Anita remained alone in the garden, surrounded only by the whispering of the leaves and the distant sounds of the palace, pondering the strangeness of fate, which brings us together with the most unexpected characters. Messengers came to Axion with troubling news. In a serious tone, they reported that the prince, like a shadow in the night, had vanished from his chambers without a trace, leaving only questions in the air. Where could he be at this late hour, and what induced him to leave the safety of the walls? Axion was also told that in another part of the castle, Arabella had already begun the solemn rituals of greeting the Empress, adding notes of anticipation and excitement to the air. Axion, thoughtfully poring over the information, suddenly realized that there was a much more complex picture unfolding before them than had first appeared. He remembered Arianda's lamp, an ancient artifact that had been kept at court for years, and which appeared to have played a key role in the search for Arabella. The Empress, who kept the lamp under her watchful control, unknowingly provided Renati with the opportunity to discover her daughter, adding intrigue to an already convoluted story. Axion's musings, however, were interrupted by a return to a more pressing problem, the unexplained disappearance of the prince. The knight, piecing together the scraps of information, suggested that the prince might have gone to meet Anita, the lady whose name stirred his heart. Mixed emotions, from jealousy to concern for the prince's well-being, made Axion set out to find him without hesitation. With each step separating him from solving this mystery, the air around him seemed more and more saturated with foreboding. After a brief but arduous search, Axion finally found Anita in one of the secluded corners of the palace, where silence and tranquility reigned all around, as if temporarily forgotten by the inhabitants of the place. His appearance was an unexpected but pleasant surprise to her, which was reflected in her eyes by the bright light of joy and surprise. With the ease of longtime acquaintances, Axion took her hand, his gesture full of determination and anxiety at the same time. He went straight to the heart of his excitement, explaining that his mission now was to find the prince, whose whereabouts remained a mystery. Anita, keeping up the spirit of openness and consideration, shared with him that she might be invited to an audience with the Empress at any moment, which added to her own worries. Axion's question as to whether she had seen the prince was met with a negative answer. Despite this, Axion allowed himself a smile, a calm but full of hidden anxiety, a smile that was meant to support them both in this moment of uncertainty. Suddenly, however, a new wave of unease stirred in Axion's heart, as his gaze fell on the abrasion adorning Anita's cheek. That small but telling sign of unhappiness made his heart beat faster. The abrasion was a silent testament to recent adversity, and the light of a protector flashed in Axion's eyes, ready to step up for protection and support in this moment of adversity. This unexpected turn of events only added weight to his decision to act, realizing that behind the palace's facade of calm lay secrets that required immediate resolution. Axion immediately asked, "Who is it?" But Anita remained silent, unable to tell him that her own father had done it. At that moment, his attention was suddenly diverted by a gust of wind that broke the silence of their secluded corner. This brief moment of confusion allowed Anita to step back, leaving the question unanswered. There was a struggle of feelings inside Axion. On the one hand, he was relieved to find Anita alone, without the prince, which calmed his troubled heart somewhat. On the other hand, he realized that their relationship might be moving from the stage of friendship to something more, which was both an eye-opener and a challenge for him. Anita had always held a special place in his heart, and now he was beginning to realize the depth of his feelings. In an attempt to soften things up and avoid further pressure on Anita, Axion decided to change the vector of the conversation. He touched her cheek gently trying to comfort her and at the same time protect her from the unpleasant memories his forthrightness might have triggered. Then, rephrasing his question with ease, Axion asked about which of the maids would follow Anita when the summons from the Empress came. The move was intended to ease the tension of the moment by moving the conversation to a safer topic, letting Anita know that he cared about her and her well-being, but didn't want to further traumatize her with intrusive questions about the past. The moment Axion offered his accompanying hand to Anita to take her to her destination, his offer was met with ease and a graceful smile on Anita's part. Without losing her nobility, she declined his offer, reminding him that the audience chamber was only a few steps away from where they were. That moment, filled with the warm glow of confidence and independence in her eyes, couldn't help but leave a mark on Axion's heart. He felt the tension in his body wrap around him with renewed force, like heavy armor put on him for a battle he couldn't win. The cause of this tension was not only the abrasion on Anita's cheek, an unwitting witness to the cruelty emanating from her parents, but also the realization that he would have to put up with this spectacle of helplessness until Anita could free herself from the shackles of this toxic family atmosphere. Anita, left alone, accepted a seat in the waiting room where every object seemed to witness the upcoming audience. Her mother, whose face was contorted with indignation, was absorbed in her own thoughts, staring into the void before her. That look, full of expectation and dislike, as if he wanted to speed up the passage of time to end his meeting with Arabella as soon as possible. Anita's mother, adamant and unwavering, could no longer hide her impatience, dreaming of the moment when Arabella's audience would finally end. As soon as the door of the waiting room opened, Arabella entered, and her appearance seemed to bring with it a ray of light that dispelled the shadows of doubt and tension. Her smile to Anita was full of warmth and sincerity, creating an atmosphere of understanding and support between them. Anita's mother, without wasting a second, jumped up to Arabella and in a burst of emotion embraced her, as if she were looking for comfort or confirmation of her hopes in this gesture. Her voice, sounding anxious at the question of whether the Empress had invited anyone else to the meeting, reflected deep concern at the possible turn of events. Arabella, keeping her casual and benevolent demeanor, replied with a smile that their visit was over and they could safely go home. Those words made Anita's mother freeze for a moment, as if there was something else in her plans that she hadn't managed to accomplish during her audience. But soon they were all heading together down the long, echo-filled corridors of the palace toward the exit, where a carriage was waiting for them, ready to take them back to the familiar world of their home. Suddenly, however, halfway out, Anita's mother, gathering her thoughts and as if finding a new resolve in herself, declared that she wished to make a personal request to the Empress. The statement sounded stern and determined, as if she had been preparing herself for this turn of events all along. Her voice, shrill and full of determination, broke the silence of the corridor, causing Anita and Arabella to gasp in surprise. Anita, looking at her mother, could not escape the feeling of indifference and bewilderment. Her gaze was fixed on her mother, who seemed willing to do anything to achieve her goal, even if it meant staying within the palace walls longer than necessary. Anita couldn't understand why her mother was delaying dealing with an issue that seemed so obvious. For Arianda's lamp, an object of undoubted importance and power, had been available to her for a whole month. Yet the attempt to break Anita's engagement was only now, a month from Arabella's return. A sudden realization illuminated Anita's thoughts, shedding light on her parents' mysterious actions. She realized that it was not the will or help of the Empress herself that was behind the success in finding her sister, but the intervention of people from the Archduchess. This revelation made her look at the situation from a new angle. It was unclear how her mother could still seek to break Anita's engagement to Axion. She didn't understand how the Marquis could seek to ruin her relationship with those who had helped find Arabella just to try to pass Arabella off as Axion. The Marquise, a woman of indomitable will and strong leadership traits, was expressing her displeasure at full speed. Her words, like sharp arrows, were directed at one of the maids. The demand for an audience with the Empress sounded like an ultimatum echoing off the walls of the room. In this whirlwind of emotion, there was suddenly a Arabella, whose footsteps were light and whose manners were the epitome of refinement. In an attempt to stop her mother, Arabella addressed the maid respectfully, which was not to the Marquise's liking. Accustomed to her word being law, the Marquise did not appreciate this deviation from the usual norms of behavior. However, as suddenly as that moment of rage had come, it subsided just as suddenly. The Marquise, like a wind that had changed direction, headed for her carriage, leaving the confusion and questions behind her. In the carriage, gliding along the roads, winding through the verdant landscape, Arabella was not without concern that their actions might have displeased the Empress herself. The Marquise, taking her daughter's words into consideration, recognized their validity. Witnessing this exchange, Anita shifted her gaze between her mother and sister in confusion, noticing something in Arabella that made her dumbfounded. The darkness of night enveloped the empire, turning it into an island of silence and mystery. Anita, who was in the epicenter of this quiet harbor, stood in the room, absorbed in her thoughts and feelings that swirled in her head like whirlwinds, unable to find a way out. At such times, the room seemed to her both a refuge and a dungeon at the same time, where every shadow could hide a secret or an omen. A leisurely knock on the door suddenly broke the silence of the night, adding a sense of surprise and anticipation to it. When Anita opened the door, she was confronted by the figure of Arabella, whose presence at this late hour was a symbol not only of sisterly concern, but also of seeking comfort. Arabella, like a shadow shrouded in the chill of the night, was on the doorstep with the request, eager to share with Anita not only a space to sleep, but a closeness that becomes especially important when the soul is restless. As she repeated her request, Arabella looked vulnerable and timid, like a small child seeking refuge from a nightmare. This timidity and directness confused Anita, but only for a moment. The confusion that had caught her off guard for a moment was soon replaced by warmth and a desire to help. Inviting her sister to sit down, Anita got down to business with unexpected determination. She took Arabella's chin carefully, as if she wanted to get a better look at her face, to search it for answers to unspoken questions. Then Anita took out the ointment, a small vial of hope that seemed so insignificant, but at that moment took on a special value. Gently and carefully, she began applying the ointment to the wound Arabella had received during her audience with the Empress. The gesture was full of care and understanding, symbolizing not just physical healing, but a deep emotional bond between the sisters who found comfort and support in each other during a difficult time. In the atmosphere of the night silence, when every sound seems louder and every word gains more weight, Arabella opened her soul as she recounted her encounter with the Empress. Her words, in which she called the Empress a good person, sounded a bit strange, which made Anita wonder. Wondering what could have caused such a reaction in the Empress, Anita heard a revelation that made her heart beat faster. Arabella, with unwavering determination, admitted that she was even willing to lose a finger for her sister's sake, even if it cost her own well-being. Arabella's frankness struck Anita even more deeply when it became known that for her sake, for the sake of their sisterly love, Arabella had jeopardized her own well-being against the will of the Empress herself. Speaking in defense of Anita's engagement to Axion, she incurred the wrath of the ruler, receiving a slap and the threat of losing a finger in return. This act of bravery by Arabella shed light on the depth of her feelings and her willingness to make sacrifices for her sister's happiness. Lying in bed, Arabella quickly drifted off into the dream world, leaving Anita alone with her thoughts. Despite all her seeming fragility and insecurity, Arabella has shown herself to be a strong and determined individual capable of standing up for her loved ones. This act of bravery, confronting the Empress herself for her sister's happiness, made Anita rethink her perception of Arabella. As she plunged into her thoughts, Anita couldn't shake off her stunned shock at what had happened. It was hard to believe that the same Arabella she knew to be fearful and insecure had such incredible fortitude. With these thoughts, Anita turned on her other side in embarrassment, trying to put her feelings and thoughts to rest, but her heart was full of gratitude and pride for her sister, whose actions that evening had changed their relationship forever.